The living room was in chaos. A vase had been shattered, shards of glass glittering under the dim light. The family portrait that once hung proudly on the wall was now on the floor, the frame splintered and torn apart. Emily stood near the fireplace, her hands trembling as tears streamed down her face. Across from her, Mark loomed, his expression a volatile mixture of heartbreak and rage. Chloe, their teenage daughter, stood frozen by the staircase, her wide eyes darting between her parents. By the window, Alex leaned against the frame, his face pale and his hands clenched into fists. The silence that filled the room was heavy, oppressive. It was the kind of silence that held the weight of 1,000 unspoken words and countless broken promises. Finally, Mark's voice cut through, low and trembling with fury. "How could you, Emily? How could you do this to me? To our family?" Emily's lips parted, but no words came. Her throat was dry, and her mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions. Shame, guilt, fear. Her gaze flickered to Alex for the briefest of moments, and that fleeting glance spoke volumes. Mark caught it, his eyes narrowing as realization settled over him like a dark cloud. "It's true, isn't it?" Mark's voice cracked as he took a step forward, his hands balling into fists. "I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined this." Chloe let out a small gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. "Mom, Alex, what is he talking about?" Her voice trembled, each word heavy with disbelief. Alex finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "Dad, please. It's not what you think." But even as he said it, the words rang hollow. The truth hung in the air, undeniable and suffocating. Emily took a step forward, her hands outstretched in a desperate attempt to reach Mark. "Mark, please let me explain." "Explain?" Mark's voice rose, his anger boiling over. "What is there to explain, Emily? You've destroyed everything. Everything." The tension in the room was palpable. Chloe backed away, shaking her head as tears welled up in her eyes. "I don't understand. This can't be happening." Emily's heart shattered at the sight of her daughter's pain. "Chloe, please listen to me. I never meant for this to happen. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Mark's laugh was bitter, his eyes burning with fury. "This isn't a mistake, Emily. This is a betrayal." Alex stepped forward, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Dad, stop. This isn't just Mom's fault. I'm to blame too." Mark's gaze snapped to his son, his face contorting in disbelief. "You?" His voice was barely a whisper, the weight of the revelation threatening to crush him. "How could you do this to me? To your sister?" Alex's shoulders slumped, guilt etched into every line of his face. "I never wanted this to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Stop." Chloe's voice rang out, sharp and filled with anguish. "Just stop. I don't want to hear any more." She turned and fled up the stairs, her sobs echoing through the house. Emily took a shaky step toward Mark, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, Mark, let's talk about this. We can fix it. We can find a way to move past this." Mark shook his head, his expression hardening. "No, Emily. There's no fixing this. You've broken something that can't be repaired." He turned away, his movements stiff and deliberate. "I'll be staying at a hotel tonight. I need time to think." As Mark walked out the door, the sound of it slamming shut echoed through the house. Emily collapsed onto the couch, her body racked with silent sobs. Alex moved to her side, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder. "Mom." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "What have we done, Alex? What have we done?" The room fell silent once more, the weight of their actions pressing down on them. The family that once seemed so perfect was now fractured, and the path to healing seemed impossibly far away. Before the chaos, before the betrayal, there was an illusion of perfection. The Carter household was the epitome of suburban bliss, a shining example of what many would envy. Mark, a successful architect, was the reliable provider, always ensuring the family had everything they needed. Emily, the ever-dedicated homemaker, balanced the demands of the house and the children seamlessly. Chloe and Alex, their bright and ambitious teenagers, seemed to thrive under the nurturing environment their parents had created. But perfection, as they say, is often an illusion. It was a bright Saturday morning when the cracks in their facade began to form. The sunlight poured through the kitchen windows as Emily prepared breakfast. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air. Mark sat at the table, flipping through the morning paper, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. Chloe was scrolling through her phone, her face occasionally lighting up with a chuckle at something on her screen. Alex entered the room, his hair slightly disheveled, and greeted everyone with a lazy smile. "Morning," he said, grabbing a piece of toast from the counter. Emily smiled warmly. "Good morning, sweetheart. Sleep well." Alex shrugged. "Can I help with anything?" Emily shook her head. "Just sit and enjoy your breakfast. We don't often get mornings like this." Mark glanced at his watch, barely looking up from his paper. "I have a meeting at noon, so I'll need to leave soon." Emily's smile faltered slightly. "On a Saturday?" "It's important," Mark replied curtly, not noticing the disappointment in her eyes. Chloe chimed in, her eyes still glued to her phone. "I'm heading out with friends later. We're working on that group project." Emily nodded, her gaze drifting to Alex, who was quietly eating his toast. "And what about you, Alex? Any plans for the day?" Alex looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Not really. I thought I'd just hang out here. Maybe we could do something together." Emily's heart warmed at the suggestion. "Like that. It's been a while since we spent time just the two of us." As the morning went on, Mark left for his meeting, and Chloe disappeared upstairs to get ready for her outing. Emily and Alex found themselves alone in the kitchen, cleaning up after breakfast. They worked side by side, their movements synchronized as they washed, dried, and put away the dishes. "You've been quiet lately," Emily said, breaking the silence. "Is everything okay?" Alex hesitated, his hands pausing over the sink. "I guess I've just been thinking a lot. About school life stuff." Emily studied him for a moment, her motherly instincts kicking in. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" Alex nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I know, Mom. Thanks." Later that afternoon, they decided to tackle the garden, which had been neglected for months. Emily handed Alex a pair of gloves and a trowel, and together they began weeding, planting, and tidying up the flower beds. The work was hard but satisfying, and the two of them shared laughter and stories as they worked under the warm sun. "Remember when Dad tried to build that birdhouse and ended up nailing his thumb instead?" Alex said, chuckling. Emily laughed, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead. "How could I forget?" He was so determined to prove he could do it without instructions. As the day turned into evening, the garden looked transformed. Emily and Alex sat on the porch steps, sipping lemonade and admiring their handiwork. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink as the sun set, casting a warm glow over the yard. "Thanks for today," Emily said, her voice soft. "I needed this." Alex looked at her, his expression earnest. "Me too. I like spending time with you, Mom. Feels different. In a good way." Emily felt a pang of something she couldn't quite identify. Gratitude, affection, and perhaps a hint of sadness. "I'm glad," she replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're a good kid, Alex." As they sat there, a comfortable silence fell between them. The Carter household appeared serene, even perfect to an outsider. But beneath the surface, the fissures were growing. Emily couldn't help but notice the distance between her and Mark, the way his gaze seemed to slide past her as if she were a piece of furniture in the room. Alex, on the other hand, noticed her. He listened, he cared, and he made her feel seen. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her mind filled with conflicting thoughts. She told herself she was imagining things, that the connection she felt with Alex was simply the bond between a mother and her son. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the warmth that spread through her chest when he smiled at her, or the way her heart lifted when he sought her out. The perfect facade of the Carter household was beginning to crack, but no one had yet noticed the storm brewing beneath the surface. The week following their garden project felt like a turning point in Emily and Alex's relationship. Mark's long hours at the office continued, leaving the house eerily quiet in the evenings. Chloe, engrossed in her schoolwork and social life, spent most of her time in her room or out with friends. The absence of noise and chaos only magnified the moments Emily and Alex spent together. It started innocently enough. Alex would join Emily in the kitchen while she prepared dinner, offering to chop vegetables or stir the sauce. They would talk about their day, sharing small anecdotes that drew them closer. Emily found herself laughing more in Alex's presence, her worries momentarily forgotten in the warmth of their conversations. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Alex noticed the tired look in Emily's eyes. "You've been doing too much lately, Mom. You need a break." Emily waved him off with a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. There's always something to do around here." Alex shook his head. "You're always taking care of everyone else. Let someone take care of you for a change." His words lingered with Emily long after the dishes were cleared. She couldn't remember the last time someone had said something like that to her. Mark used to, in the early days of their marriage, but those moments had become few and far between. Alex's attention and thoughtfulness filled a void she hadn't realized had grown so vast. The following weekend, Chloe left for a sleepover, and Mark was once again consumed by work. Emily and Alex decided to watch a movie together, a light-hearted comedy to distract them from the monotony of the evening. They settled on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between them. The room was dimly lit, the glow of the TV casting soft shadows on their faces. Halfway through the movie, Emily found herself leaning against Alex, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, one she told herself was entirely innocent. Alex didn't seem to mind. In fact, he shifted slightly to make her more comfortable. They stayed like that until the credits rolled, neither one speaking, the silence between them filled with an unspoken understanding. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. Alex began to seek Emily out more often, whether it was to share a funny story from school or to ask for her opinion on a book he was reading. Emily found herself looking forward to these moments, the companionship easing the loneliness that had crept into her life. One afternoon, as they sat in the backyard enjoying the warm spring sunshine, Alex turned to Emily with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever feel like Dad's not really here, even when he's home?" Emily hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Sometimes," she admitted softly. "He's been so focused on work lately. I know he means well, but it's hard not to feel overlooked." Alex reached over, placing a hand on hers. "You deserve better, Mom. You deserve someone who sees you, who appreciates everything you do." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The sincerity in Alex's voice, the warmth in his gaze, was almost too much to bear. She squeezed his hand lightly, offering a faint smile. "Thank you, Alex. That means a lot to me." In that moment, Emily realized just how much she had come to rely on Alex's presence in her life. He was more than her son. He was her confidant, her anchor in a sea of uncertainty. But as comforting as that realization was, it also filled her with a sense of unease. She couldn't ignore the way her heart fluttered when he looked at her, or the way her pulse quickened when their hands brushed. The lines between them were becoming increasingly blurred, and Emily knew she was treading dangerous waters. But she couldn't bring herself to pull away. The connection she felt with Alex was too strong, too intoxicating. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, and she wasn't ready to let go of that feeling. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the backyard, Emily and Alex sat in silence, the weight of their unspoken emotions hanging heavily in the air. Neither one knew what the future held, but they both understood that their relationship was changing in ways neither of them could have anticipated. As the days turned into weeks, the blurred lines between Emily and Alex's relationship became harder to ignore. Mark's continued absence from the family dynamic, both emotionally and physically, left a void that Alex seemed to instinctively fill. Chloe remained busy with her own life, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in her home. And while Emily told herself that her closeness with Alex was merely a mother finding solace in her son, the subtle shifts in their interactions spoke volumes. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Emily found herself in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the air, and she hummed softly to herself as she chopped vegetables. Alex walked in, his footsteps light against the tiled floor. "Need any help?" he asked, leaning casually against the counter. Emily looked up, her smile warm. "You're always so helpful lately. Sure, you can stir the sauce." Alex moved closer, their shoulders brushing briefly as he took the wooden spoon from her hand. The touch sent a jolt through Emily, though she quickly dismissed it. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, the rhythmic motions of cooking grounding them. But every so often, Emily found her gaze lingering on Alex, watching the way he moved with an ease and confidence that reminded her of Mark in their younger days. As the meal simmered on the stove, Alex turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You've been happier lately," he said. "It's nice to see." Emily hesitated, caught off guard by his observation. "Have I?" she replied, her voice soft. Alex nodded. "I like seeing you smile." His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that Emily couldn't quite place. She felt a warmth rise in her chest, a mixture of gratitude and something else, something she wasn't ready to name. She reached out and placed a hand on his arm, the gesture lingering just a moment too long. "Thank you, Alex," she said sincerely. "That means a lot." Later that evening, after dinner was served and Chloe retreated to her room, Emily and Alex found themselves alone in the living room. The TV played softly in the background, but neither of them paid much attention to it. Emily sat on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, while Alex lounged nearby, his gaze occasionally flickering toward her. "You seem tired," Alex said after a while. "You should rest more." Emily chuckled softly. "I've been a mom for over 2 decades. Rest isn't exactly part of the job description." Alex moved closer, his expression serious. "You do too much for everyone, Mom. You deserve to be taken care of too." The earnestness in his voice caught Emily off guard. She looked at him, her breath hitching slightly as their eyes met. For a brief moment, the world seemed to shrink, leaving only the two of them in its wake. Emily quickly broke the gaze, taking a sip of her wine to steady herself. "Thank you, Alex," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. As the night wore on, the air between them grew heavier, charged with unspoken words and emotions. Emily felt the tension, a mix of confusion and longing that she couldn't shake. She told herself it was nothing, that she was reading too much into their interactions. But deep down she knew the truth. The boundaries between them were becoming increasingly fragile. The next day, Emily decided to clear her mind with a walk along the beach. She invited Alex to join her, hoping the fresh air and open space would help her regain perspective. The ocean stretched out before them, its waves crashing against the shore in a soothing rhythm. They walked side by side, their footsteps leaving a trail in the damp sand. "It's beautiful out here," Alex said, breaking the silence. Emily nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I used to come here all the time when I was younger. It always felt like a place where I could think clearly. Do you still feel that way?" Alex asked, his tone curious. Emily hesitated before answering. "Sometimes. But lately, my thoughts feel more tangled than ever." Alex stopped walking and turned to her, his expression concerned. "You don't have to figure everything out alone, Mom. I'm here for you." The sincerity in his voice made Emily's heart ache. She looked at him, her eyes searching his for something she couldn't name. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." They continued walking, the silence between them now heavy with unspoken emotions. Emily couldn't help but notice the way Alex's presence made her feel, comforted, seen, and understood in a way she hadn't felt in years. But along with those feelings came a deep sense of guilt and confusion. She knew she was treading dangerous waters, but she couldn't bring herself to pull away. That evening, as they sat on the couch watching the sunset through the living room window, Alex reached out and took Emily's hand in his. The gesture was innocent enough, but the way his fingers brushed against hers sent a shiver down her spine. Emily didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself lean into the moment, savoring the warmth of his touch. For the first time in years, Emily felt truly seen, and she wasn't ready to let go of that feeling. But as the night wore on, the weight of their connection became harder to ignore. The lines between them were no longer just blurred, they were disappearing altogether. Emily lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling as her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She knew she needed to set boundaries, to address the growing complexity of their relationship before it spiraled into something they couldn't take back. But a part of her, a small, selfish part, wasn't ready to let go of the connection she had found with Alex. It filled a void that had been empty for far too long. As the house settled into silence, Emily resolved to figure out what to do. But deep down, she knew that the road ahead would only become more complicated. The evening was quiet, with a faint hum of crickets outside and the soft glow of the living room lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Mark was working late again, Chloe was at her friend's house, and Emily found herself alone with Alex once more. She sat on the couch, nursing a glass of wine, while Alex flipped through a book he had picked up earlier that day. The comfortable silence between them was something Emily had come to cherish, but tonight it felt different, heavier, charged. "Want another glass?" Alex asked, nodding toward Emily's nearly empty wine glass. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Sure, why not? It's been a long day." Alex took her glass and disappeared into the kitchen. Emily leaned back against the cushions, her thoughts drifting. She had tried to convince herself that the closeness she felt with Alex was nothing out of the ordinary, that it was just the bond between a mother and son. But as the days went on, the lines between affection and something deeper continued to blur. When Alex returned, he handed her the glass, their fingers brushing briefly. Emily felt her breath hitch, but she quickly masked it with a polite smile. "Thanks, sweetheart." He sat beside her, closer than usual, his presence warm and reassuring. They talked for a while, their conversation light and easy, but the undercurrent of tension between them was undeniable. Emily couldn't ignore the way Alex looked at her, his gaze lingering a moment too long, or the way her heart seemed to race whenever he was near. As the night wore on, their laughter filled the room, a stark contrast to the quiet tension building between them. At one point, Alex reached out to brush a strand of hair from Emily's face. His touch gentle yet deliberate. Emily froze, her mind racing as she tried to process the moment. "Alex," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, pulling his hand back. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Emily interrupted, her cheeks flushed. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch lingering. "You don't have to apologize." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Emily felt a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, guilt, and an inexplicable longing. She knew she should pull away, set boundaries, and put an end to the growing intimacy between them. But a part of her couldn't bring herself to do it. The connection she felt with Alex was unlike anything she had experienced in years, and she wasn't ready to let it go. The moment was broken by the sound of Emily's phone buzzing on the coffee table. She reached for it, grateful for the distraction. It was a message from Mark. "Working late again. Don't wait up." Emily stared at the screen, her emotions a tangled mess. She set the phone down and turned back to Alex, who was watching her carefully. "Dad working late again?" he asked. She nodded, her shoulders slumping. "Seems like that's all he does these days." Alex's expression softened. "You deserve better, Mom. You deserve someone who makes you feel valued." Emily looked at him, her heart aching at the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you, Alex. That means a lot." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Emily and Alex continued their conversation, but the tension between them remained, unspoken yet palpable. When it was time to call it a night, Emily stood and hesitated for a moment before leaning down to kiss Alex on the cheek. "Good night, sweetheart," she said softly. "Good night, Mom," he replied, his voice equally soft. As Emily walked upstairs to her bedroom, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She knew that what was happening between her and Alex was dangerous, that they were crossing lines that should never be crossed. But a part of her couldn't help but feel drawn to him, to the warmth and understanding he offered in a way that Mark hadn't in years. The following day, the tension between them seemed to linger. Emily found herself stealing glances at Alex, her thoughts a tangled mess of guilt and longing. She tried to distract herself with chores and errands, but no matter what she did, her mind kept drifting back to him. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Chloe and Mark were both unusually quiet. Chloe was absorbed in her phone, and Mark seemed preoccupied with work, barely acknowledging the rest of the family. The disconnect in the household was palpable, and Emily felt a pang of sadness at how far they had drifted apart. Alex, however, was attentive as always. He asked Emily about her day, cracked jokes to lighten the mood, and even offered to help with the dishes after dinner. His presence was a stark contrast to the detachment of the rest of the family, and Emily couldn't help but feel drawn to him even more. As the evening progressed, Emily found herself alone with Alex once again. They sat in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting warm shadows on the walls. Alex turned to her, his expression serious. "Mom, can I ask you something?" he said, his voice low. "Of course," she replied, her heart pounding in her chest. "Are you happy?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. Emily hesitated, caught off guard by the question. I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't thought about it in a long time." Alex reached out and took her hand in his touch gentle yet firm. "You deserve to be happy, Mom. You deserve someone who makes you feel loved and appreciated." His words sent a wave of emotion crashing over Emily. She looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Alex. You don't know how much that means to me." For a moment, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. Emily felt an overwhelming urge to pull him into an embrace, to hold on to the comfort and warmth he offered. But she stopped herself, the weight of her guilt and the fear of crossing an irreversible line holding her back. As the night wore on, Emily lay in bed, her mind racing. She knew she needed to address the growing closeness between her and Alex, to set boundaries before it was too late. But a part of her wasn't ready to let go of the connection they had built. It was intoxicating, filling a void that had been empty for far too long. The lines had been crossed, and Emily knew there was no turning back. The question now was how far they were willing to go, and what the consequences would be when the truth inevitably came to light. The Carter household was no longer a place of serenity. Unspoken tensions and mounting guilt hung in the air like an invisible storm cloud, threatening to burst at any moment. Emily had tried to convince herself that things could return to normal, that the growing closeness with Alex was just a phase, a misstep in a time of loneliness. But as the days passed, the weight of her actions and feelings became impossible to ignore. Mark, oblivious to the emotional undercurrents tearing through his family, was more consumed by his work than ever. Chloe, too engrossed in her world of friends and school, barely noticed the growing chasm in their family dynamic. But Alex noticed, and so did Emily. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, the tension became palpable. Mark was distracted, barely touching his food as he scrolled through emails on his phone. Chloe sat with her headphones on, bobbing her head slightly to music only she could hear. Emily, seated across from Alex, struggled to keep her composure. "So, Chloe," Emily began, her voice forcedly cheerful, "how was your day?" Chloe didn't respond, lost in her music. Alex nudged her arm lightly, and she pulled out an earbud with an annoyed sigh. "What?" "I asked how your day was," Emily repeated, her smile strained. "Fine," Chloe replied dismissively, before popping her earbud back in and returning to her world. Emily sighed and turned to Mark. "And you?" Anything new at work? Mark grunted in response, his eyes glued to his phone. Emily's heart sank as she realized how little he cared about the family dinner she had worked so hard to prepare. She glanced at Alex, who gave her a small, knowing smile, as if to say, "You're not alone." After dinner, as Emily cleared the table, Alex lingered in the kitchen. "Mom, you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Emily hesitated before nodding. "I'm fine. Just tired." Alex stepped closer, his presence warm and reassuring. "You don't have to pretend with me, you know. I'm here for you." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. The sincerity in Alex's voice was almost too much to bear. She turned to him, her eyes glistening. "Thank you, Alex. I don't know what I'd do without you." The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken words. Emily knew she should pull away, create distance, but instead, she found herself leaning into his embrace. Alex wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly as if trying to shield her from the pain she carried. "Mom," Alex murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, "you don't have to face this alone." Emily's breath hitched, and she pulled back slightly to look at him. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the world seemed to fade away. But before anything more could happen, the sound of Mark clearing his throat shattered the moment. "What's going on in here?" Mark asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Emily quickly stepped back, her face flushing. "Nothing. Alex was just helping me with the dishes." Mark raised an eyebrow but said nothing, his gaze lingering on them for a moment before he turned and left the room. Emily exhaled shakily, her heart pounding in her chest. Alex looked at her, his expression a mix of concern and guilt. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to make things awkward." "It's not your fault," Emily replied, her voice trembling. I don't know what's happening to me." The days that followed were filled with tension and unease. Emily tried to put distance between herself and Alex, but no matter how hard she tried, she found herself drawn to him. Their moments together became fewer but more charged, each interaction laced with emotions they couldn't name or deny. Chloe, oblivious to the turmoil in the household, began spending more time out of the house. Mark, meanwhile, seemed to grow suspicious. His late nights at the office became less frequent, and he began to pay more attention to Emily and Alex's interactions. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Mark's gaze lingered on Emily and Alex. "You two seem to be spending a lot of time together lately," he remarked, his tone light but his eyes probing. Emily froze, her mind racing for a response. "Well, with you working so much and Chloe being busy, it's just been nice to have someone around," she said, forcing a smile. Mark nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "That's good. Family should stick together." The conversation moved on, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was watching her more closely. She began to feel as though she was walking on eggshells, constantly on edge and afraid of slipping up. One night, as Emily lay in bed, her thoughts consumed by guilt and confusion, Mark turned to her. "Is there something you're not telling me?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. Emily's heart raced. "What do you mean?" she replied, feigning ignorance. Mark studied her for a moment before shaking his head. "Nothing. Forget I said anything." But Emily knew he hadn't forgotten. The cracks in their family were becoming impossible to ignore, and the truth was inching closer to the surface. She knew it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. Meanwhile, Alex struggled with his own guilt and confusion. He knew that his feelings for Emily were wrong, that their closeness was crossing boundaries that should never be crossed. But he couldn't bring himself to pull away. The connection he felt with her was too strong, too intoxicating. As the days passed, the tension in the Carter household reached a boiling point. The once perfect family was on the brink of collapse, and the consequences of their actions were about to come crashing down. The Carter household felt like a ticking time bomb, each passing day bringing them closer to an inevitable explosion. Emily could feel the tension mounting, Mark's suspicious glances growing more frequent, and Chloe's detachment becoming harder to ignore. Meanwhile, her relationship with Alex, already fraught with complexities, began to spiral into uncharted territory. It was a Friday evening when the first fissure cracked wide open. The family had gathered for dinner, a rare occasion given Mark's work commitments and Chloe's busy social life. Emily had gone out of her way to prepare a special meal, hoping to create a semblance of normalcy amidst the storm brewing within her. The table was set beautifully, candles casting a warm glow over the room. Emily served the dishes, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the plates in front of everyone. She avoided looking directly at Mark, whose presence felt heavier than usual. "This looks amazing, Mom," Alex said, his smile genuine as he looked up at her. His voice carried a warmth that Emily found both comforting and unsettling. "Thanks, sweetheart," she replied softly, her gaze lingering on him a moment too long. Mark cleared his throat, drawing her attention. "Emily, you've really gone all out tonight. Any special occasion?" Emily shook her head, forcing a smile. "I just thought it'd be nice to have a family dinner. It feels like we haven't done this in ages." Mark nodded, his expression unreadable. "Well, it's nice. We should do it more often." The conversation around the table was stilted, each family member seemingly lost in their own thoughts. Chloe, as usual, was glued to her phone, her fork absently pushing food around her plate. Mark alternated between eating and glancing at his phone, though his eyes frequently darted toward Emily and Alex. "Chloe," Mark said abruptly, breaking the silence. "Put your phone away. We're having dinner as a family." Chloe groaned but complied, setting her phone down with a huff. "Happy now?" Mark ignored her tone, turning his attention to Alex. "How's school going, Alex? Keeping up with your studies?" Alex nodded, his demeanor calm. "Yeah, everything's going well. I'm actually ahead on most of my assignments." "Good to hear," Mark replied, his gaze lingering on his son. "You've been spending a lot of time at home lately. No plans with friends?" Alex shrugged. "Not really. I've just been enjoying spending time with Mom." The room fell silent, the weight of Alex's words hanging heavily in the air. Emily felt her stomach knot as Mark's eyes flickered toward her, his expression darkening. "Is that so?" Mark said slowly, his tone carrying an edge that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "Well, it's good that you're close. Family is important." Alex didn't respond, his focus shifting back to his plate. Emily felt her heart pounding in her chest, the unspoken tension between her and Mark growing unbearable. She knew he was suspicious, that he could sense something wasn't right, but she didn't know how to diffuse the situation. After dinner, Emily retreated to the kitchen to wash the dishes, her hands trembling as she scrubbed the plates. Alex appeared beside her, grabbing a towel to help dry. "You don't have to help," Emily said softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of running water. "I want to," Alex replied, his tone gentle. "You've done enough for everyone tonight." Emily glanced at him, her heart aching at the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you, Alex. You're always so thoughtful." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind them. Emily turned to see Mark standing in the doorway, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. "Alex," Mark said, his voice firm. "Why don't you go check on Chloe? I need to talk to your mom." Alex hesitated, his eyes darting to Emily. She gave him a small nod, silently urging him to go. Once Alex left the room, Mark stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "Emily," he began, his voice low. "What's going on between you and Alex?" Emily froze, her mind racing. "What do you mean?" she asked, feigning ignorance. "You know exactly what I mean," Mark said, his tone sharp. "I've seen the way you two look at each other, the way you act around him. It's not normal." Emily felt her stomach churn. "Mark, you're imagining things. Alex and I are just close. That's all." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me, Emily. I'm not stupid. Something is going on, and I want the truth." Emily's hands gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles turning white. She couldn't meet his gaze, the weight of her guilt pressing down on her like a crushing tide. Mark stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Have you forgotten that we're married? That we have a family? Whatever this is, it needs to stop. Now. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she finally looked at him. Mark, I never wanted this to happen. I didn't mean for things to get so complicated. Complicated? Mark spat, his anger boiling over. You've betrayed me, Emily. You've betrayed this family. The sound of Mark's voice carried through the house, drawing Alex and Chloe into the kitchen. Chloe's eyes widened in shock as she took in the scene before her. What's going on? She demanded, her voice trembling. Mark turned to her, his expression hardening. Ask your mother. Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Chloe, please. No, Mark interrupted, his voice cold. She deserves to know the truth. The room fell into chaos as Mark's accusations spilled out, each word cutting deeper than the last. Chloe stood frozen, her face pale as she struggled to process what she was hearing. Alex stepped forward, his voice firm as he tried to defend Emily. Dad, stop, Alex said, his tone steady. This isn't just Mom's fault. I'm to blame too. Mark's gaze snapped to Alex, his eyes blazing with fury. You. How could you? The rest of his words were lost as the weight of the revelation finally shattered the fragile threads holding their family together. Chloe fled the room in tears, Mark stormed out of the house, and Emily collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Alex knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. But no amount of apologies could undo the damage that had been done. The Carter family was broken, and there was no going back. The aftermath of the explosive night left the Carter household in ruins. The once cohesive family was now fragmented, each member retreating into their own corner of sorrow and confusion. Emily had spent the night crying on the living room couch, her face buried in a pillow as guilt consumed her. Alex had stayed by her side, silently offering comfort, though his own turmoil was evident in the tension in his jaw and the way his hands trembled. By morning, Mark was gone. A hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter simply read, I need space. Don't contact me. Chloe, still in shock from the previous night's revelations, had locked herself in her room, refusing to come out despite Emily's repeated knocks and pleas. Emily sat at the kitchen table, clutching a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The weight of the past few months bore down on her, each decision and misstep replaying in her mind like a cruel montage. She knew she had destroyed the foundation of her family, but she didn't know how to begin repairing the damage. Alex entered the kitchen, his steps hesitant. Morning, he said softly, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Emily looked up, her eyes red and puffy. Morning, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her, the silence between them heavy. Finally he spoke. Mom, we need to talk about what happened. Emily nodded, though the thought of addressing their actions made her stomach churn. I know, she said, her hands trembling as she placed the cup on the table. But I don't even know where to start. Alex leaned forward, his gaze steady. We need to take responsibility. For everything. For Dad, for Chloe, for us. Emily felt a pang of guilt at his words. I never wanted any of this to happen, she said, her voice cracking. I was just so lonely. And you made me feel seen, Alex. You made me feel important again. Alex reached across the table, taking her hands in his. I never wanted to hurt anyone either, Mom. I just care about you. More than I should. Emily pulled her hands away, tears streaming down her face. We can't keep doing this, Alex. Wrong. We've already hurt everyone we love. We need to stop. Alex nodded, though his expression was conflicted. No. But how do we fix this? How do we move on? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Emily knew there was no simple solution, no easy way to mend the shattered pieces of their family. But she also knew that they couldn't continue down the path they were on. It was time to make amends, no matter how painful it might be. Later that day, Emily mustered the courage to approach Chloe. She stood outside her daughter's bedroom door, her heart pounding as she knocked softly. "Chloe, can we talk, sweetheart?" There was no response, but Emily heard the faint sound of movement inside. She waited a moment before speaking again. "I know you're upset, and you have every right to be, but I need you to know how sorry I am. For everything." The door creaked open slightly, and Chloe's tear-streaked face appeared. "You've ruined everything," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "How could you do this to Dad? To me? To us?" Emily's heart broke at the pain in her daughter's eyes. "I know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I made a terrible mistake, Chloe. And I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." Chloe stepped back, crossing her arms defensively. "Sorry isn't enough, Mom. You broke our family. I don't even know who you are anymore." Emily took a shaky breath, tears streaming down her face. "I know I've let you down, Chloe. And I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I'm going to do everything I can to make this right. For you, for your dad, and for Alex." Chloe's gaze softened slightly, though her anger was still evident. "I don't know if things can ever be fixed." Emily nodded, understanding her daughter's pain. "I'll do whatever it takes to try." As Chloe closed the door, Emily leaned against the wall, her emotions overwhelming her. She knew that rebuilding her relationship with her daughter would take time, but she was determined to prove that she could change. In the days that followed, Emily focused on small steps to mend the fractured bonds in her family. She reached out to Mark, leaving voicemails apologizing for her actions and asking for a chance to talk. Though he didn't respond, she held on to the hope that he would eventually be willing to listen. She also worked to rebuild her connection with Chloe, spending time with her in ways that felt genuine and unforced. Whether it was helping her with school projects or simply sitting with her while she watched TV, Emily made an effort to show her daughter that she was committed to making amends. Alex, meanwhile, struggled with his own guilt. He avoided Emily as much as possible, focusing on his schoolwork and spending time with friends. Though he still cared deeply for his mother, he knew that their relationship had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. One evening, as Emily sat alone in the living room, her phone buzzed with a message from Mark. Her heart raced as she opened it, her hands trembling. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. I'll come by in the afternoon." Emily exhaled shakily, relief and apprehension washing over her. She knew that the conversation with Mark would be difficult, but it was a step toward addressing the damage she had caused. The next day, as the afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, Emily sat anxiously on the couch, waiting for Mark to arrive. When the doorbell rang, she took a deep breath and opened the door to find him standing there, his expression weary but resolute. "Hi," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. Mark nodded, his gaze scanning the room briefly before he sat down. "Hi." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. Finally Mark spoke. "Emily, I've had time to think about everything, and I need to know the truth. All of it." Emily nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'll tell you everything," she said, her voice trembling. "And I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." As Emily began to recount the events that had led to their family's fracture, Mark listened intently, his expression a mix of anger, hurt, and exhaustion. Though the path to healing seemed impossibly long, Emily clung to the hope that it was still possible. The journey to rebuild their family would be fraught with challenges, but Emily was determined to face them head-on. For Mark, for Chloe, for Alex, and for herself. The conversation with Mark lingered in Emily's mind long after he left. His parting words, heavy with disappointment and pain, echoed in her ears. "We'll see if there's anything left to rebuild, Emily. But this isn't something I can forgive overnight." The weight of those words crushed her spirit, but she knew she couldn't give up, not yet. The next morning, the Carter household was silent, as though the weight of the previous weeks had drained the life out of it. Chloe avoided Emily whenever possible, retreating to her room or leaving the house to spend time with friends. Alex, too, had withdrawn, his once warm demeanor replaced with a quiet tension that spoke volumes. The distance between Emily and her children was palpable, and it left her feeling isolated in her own home. Determined to confront the growing divide, Emily decided to call a family meeting. It wasn't something they had done in years, but she felt it was necessary to address the elephant in the room. Gathering her courage, she knocked on Chloe's door and peeked inside. "Chloe, can you come downstairs? I need to talk to both of you," Emily said softly. Chloe rolled her eyes but reluctantly got up. "Fine," she muttered, brushing past Emily. Emily found Alex in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. "Alex, can you join us in the dining room? It's important," she said. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable, before nodding and turning off the TV. The three of them sat around the dining table, the air thick with tension. Emily took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. "I know I've hurt both of you," she began, her voice trembling. "And I don't even know where to begin making things right. But I need you to know that I'm truly sorry. For everything." Chloe crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. "Sorry doesn't fix what you did, Mom. You destroyed this family." Emily flinched at her daughter's harsh words but nodded. "You're right. I did. And I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But I want to try to make things better." Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze fixed on the table. "What about Dad?" he asked quietly. "Have you talked to him?" Emily nodded. "I spoke with him yesterday. He's hurt and angry, and I don't blame him. But he said he's willing to see if there's anything left to rebuild. That's all I can hope for right now." Chloe scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "And what about you and Alex? Are you just going to pretend that nothing happened?" Emily's face paled, and she struggled to find the right words. "What happened between Alex and me was a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. And I take full responsibility for it." Alex finally looked up, his expression conflicted. "It wasn't just you, Mom. I'm just as much to blame. I crossed lines I shouldn't have." Chloe's gaze darted between them, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "I can't believe this. You're both acting like this is something you can just apologize for and move on from. It's not that simple." "I know it's not," Emily said, her voice cracking. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I love this family, and I don't want to lose it." Chloe stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air," she said, storming out of the house without another word. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house, leaving Emily and Alex alone at the table. The silence between them was deafening, and Emily felt the weight of her failures pressing down on her. "I don't think she'll ever forgive me," Emily said softly, tears streaming down her face. Alex reached across the table, placing a hand on hers. "She's hurt, Mom. But she'll come around. It'll just take time." Emily shook her head, her tears falling onto the table. "I've ruined everything, Alex. I don't know how to fix this." Alex's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," she whispered, "for still believing in me." As the day wore on, Emily focused on small gestures to try to mend the fractured relationships in her family. She cooked Chloe's favorite dinner, hoping it would serve as a peace offering. She sent Mark a heartfelt message, thanking him for being willing to talk and expressing her hope for a second chance. And she spent time with Alex, though she was careful to keep their interactions light and appropriate. That evening, Chloe returned home, her expression guarded but less hostile. Emily approached her cautiously, holding out a plate of homemade lasagna. "I made your favorite," she said, her voice tentative. "I thought we could eat together, just the two of us." Chloe hesitated before taking the plate. "Thanks," she said quietly, sitting down at the table. Emily joined her, the two of them eating in silence for a while. Finally Chloe spoke, her voice soft. I just don't understand why you did it. Why you risked everything. Emily set her fork down, her hands trembling. I wish I had a good answer for you, Chloe. I was lonely and I made terrible choices. But it had nothing to do with you or your dad. It was my own weakness. Chloe's eyes filled with tears and she looked away. I miss how things used to be. When we were a real family. I do too, Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. And I want to try to get back to that, if you're willing to give me a chance. Chloe didn't respond, but she didn't leave the table either. For Emily, it was a small but meaningful step forward. As the night wore on, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. The road to healing would be long and arduous, but she was determined to take it one step at a time. For Chloe, for Mark, and for Alex, but most importantly for herself. The Carter family was like a shattered vase, its pieces scattered and broken, yet not beyond repair. Emily knew that rebuilding the trust she had destroyed would take time, patience, and relentless effort. The cracks in their relationships might always remain, but she was determined to fill those fractures with love and sincerity. In the days following the family meeting, Emily noticed small, tentative changes. Chloe still kept her distance, but the sharp edge to her words had softened. Mark had responded to her message, agreeing to meet again for another conversation. Alex, though still grappling with his guilt, had thrown himself into helping around the house, a quiet but meaningful gesture of atonement. One Saturday morning, Emily stood in the kitchen, pouring a cup of coffee as the sunlight streamed through the window. She heard footsteps and turned to see Mark entering. His face drawn but calm. "Good morning," she said softly, offering a small smile. "Morning," Mark replied, sitting down at the table. He ran a hand through his hair, looking at her with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "I thought we could talk." Emily nodded, setting her coffee down and taking a seat across from him. Her hands trembled slightly, but she clasped them together, grounding herself. "Mark," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to comprehend. And I know that rebuilding your trust will take more than words. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Mark sighed, his gaze fixed on the table. "It's not just about trust, Emily. It's about understanding why. Why you did this. Why you let it go so far." Emily swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "I was lonely, Mark. You've been so focused on work, and I felt invisible. It doesn't excuse what I did. Nothing ever could. But that's the truth." Mark's jaw tightened and he looked at her. His eyes filled with hurt. "Do you think I wasn't lonely too? Do you think I didn't feel the distance growing between us?" Emily's breath caught. She hadn't considered that Mark might have been feeling the same isolation that had driven her to her actions. "I didn't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was so caught up in my own pain that I didn't see yours." Mark leaned back in his chair, his shoulders slumping. "We were supposed to face things together, Emily. That's what a marriage is. But instead you turned to someone else." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she nodded. "You're right. Failed you. Failed us. But I don't want to give up on what we had. I want to fight for our family if you're willing to try." Mark was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you completely. But for the sake of our family, I'm willing to try." Relief washed over Emily, though she knew that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. "Thank you, Mark. That means more than I can say." Over the next few weeks, the Carter family began to piece themselves back together, one small step at a time. Mark and Emily started attending counseling sessions, where they confronted their feelings of betrayal, loneliness, and resentment. The sessions were painful but necessary, forcing them to address the underlying issues that had led to their estrangement. Chloe, too, began to open up, though her forgiveness came slowly. One afternoon, as she sat in the living room scrolling through her phone, Emily approached her cautiously. "Chloe," Emily said, her voice tentative. "Can we talk?" Chloe glanced up, her expression guarded. "What is it?" Emily sat down beside her, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. You've been so strong through all of this, and I know it hasn't been easy." Chloe's gaze softened slightly, though her voice remained hesitant. "It hasn't been easy for any of us." Emily nodded. "You're right. But I want you to know that I'm here for you no matter what. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for the pain I've caused." Chloe was quiet for a moment before she spoke. "I don't know if I can ever forget what happened, but I do want us to move forward." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she reached out to take Chloe's hand. "That's all I could ever hope for. Thank you, sweetheart." Meanwhile, Alex found his own way of seeking redemption. He threw himself into his studies, focusing on building a future that would make his family proud. Though his relationship with Emily remained strained, he worked to rebuild the bond they had once shared as mother and son, keeping their interactions respectful and appropriate. One evening, as Alex helped Emily clean up after dinner, he broke the silence. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I want you to know that I'm sorry for everything." Emily looked at him, her heart aching with both guilt and gratitude. "I'm sorry too, Alex, for letting things get out of control. But I'm proud of you for taking responsibility." He nodded, his gaze steady. "I just want us to be a family again. That's all I've ever wanted." Emily smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." As the weeks turned into months, the Carter family continued their journey toward healing. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, arguments, and moments of doubt. But through it all, they clung to the hope that they could rebuild what had been broken. One sunny afternoon, the family gathered in the backyard for a barbecue. Mark manned the grill, flipping burgers with a rare smile on his face. Chloe and Alex sat at the picnic table, laughing over an inside joke. Emily watched from the patio, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and hope. It wasn't a perfect picture, and it never would be. The scars of their past would always remain, a reminder of the mistakes they had made and the lessons they had learned. But for the first time in a long time, Emily felt a glimmer of optimism for the future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the backyard in a warm golden glow, Emily joined her family at the table. They ate, laughed, and shared stories, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. The road ahead would still be challenging, but Emily was determined to face it with courage and love. For her family, for herself, and for the fragile hope that they could, one day, truly heal. The Carter family was the epitome of suburban bliss, or so it seemed. Emily had devoted her life to creating a warm, nurturing home for her children Alex and Chloe, while Mark worked tirelessly to provide for them. Their days were filled with family outings, shared meals, and laughter that echoed through the house. To anyone looking in from the outside, their life appeared flawless. But perfection, as they say, is often a mirage. Emily had always been the cornerstone of the family. She woke up early to prepare breakfast, ensuring that Mark had his coffee and the kids their pancakes before heading off to school and work. The kitchen was her sanctuary, a place where she poured her love into every meal. Alex would often join her, chatting about his classes or teasing Chloe about her latest fashion obsession. Yet, even in those seemingly perfect moments, there were cracks, tiny fissures that Emily had learned to ignore. Mark's job demanded long hours, and his presence at home had gradually become more sporadic. Chloe, now a teenager, was navigating her own world of friends and schoolwork, often retreating to her room or spending weekends out. Alex, though still close to his mother, had begun to explore his independence as he prepared for college. Emily found herself increasingly alone in the home she had worked so hard to build. Her days were filled with a monotony of chores and errands, her nights spent staring at the ceiling, longing for the connection she and Mark once shared. She told herself that this was normal, that every marriage went through phases, but the emptiness in her heart was hard to ignore. One evening, as Emily sat on the couch scrolling through old photo albums, Alex joined her. "What are you looking at?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Just some old memories," Emily replied, a wistful smile on her lips. She turned the album to show him a photo of their family vacation to the Grand Canyon. In the picture, Mark had his arm around Emily, while Alex and Chloe stood in front of them, grinning from ear to ear. "We used to be so happy," Emily said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. Alex leaned closer, studying the photo. "We're still happy, Mom. Things are just different now." Emily sighed, closing the album. "I suppose you're right. But sometimes I miss how things used to be." Their conversation shifted to lighter topics, but that moment lingered in Emily's mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that the family she had worked so hard to nurture was slipping through her fingers. As the days went on, Emily began to notice small changes in her interactions with Alex. He seemed more attentive, more present than Mark or Chloe. He offered to help with chores, spent time talking with her in the evenings, and even joined her on her weekend walks around the neighborhood. Emily cherished these moments, grateful for the bond they shared, but she couldn't deny the undercurrent of longing that had begun to stir within her. It was during one of these walks that Emily confided in Alex about her struggles. "I don't know what's happened to us," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "Your dad and I used to be so close, but now it feels like we're just going through the motions." Alex frowned, his brow furrowing in concern. "Have you talked to him about how you feel?" Emily shook her head. "He's so busy with work. I don't want to burden him." "You're not a burden, Mom," Alex said firmly. "You're the glue that holds this family together. Don't forget that." Emily's heart swelled at his words, a mix of gratitude and sadness washing over her. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot." As they continued their walk, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Alex saw her in a way no one else did. Not even Mark. It was a realization that both comforted and unnerved her. The Carter household was shifting, though not in ways anyone openly acknowledged. Mark's long hours at the office had become the norm, and even when he was home, his focus seemed elsewhere. On his laptop, his phone, or the endless stream of work emails that demanded his attention. The man Emily had married, the one who used to surprise her with flowers and handwritten notes, now felt like a stranger sitting across the dinner table. Chloe, wrapped up in her teenage world, was equally detached. She spent her evenings locked in her room, music blasting through her headphones as she scrolled endlessly on her phone. Conversations with her were brief and often tinged with the sharp sarcasm of adolescence. Emily tried to connect with her daughter, but every attempt felt like shouting into the void. In contrast, Alex's presence grew stronger, filling the spaces left by Mark and Chloe's absence. He had always been attentive and kind, but now his gestures carried a weight that Emily couldn't ignore. He noticed when she was tired and offered to help with chores. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, in a way that made her feel valued. And most of all, he seemed to understand her loneliness without her having to say a word. One evening, Emily stood at the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables for dinner. The rhythmic motion of the knife against the cutting board was soothing, a rare moment of calm in her chaotic mind. Alex walked in, his footsteps light against the tiled floor. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice warm and familiar. Emily glanced up, smiling softly. "I wouldn't say no to a sous chef." Alex grinned and joined her, rolling up his sleeves. As they worked side by side, the conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about his classes, his plans for the weekend, and even Chloe's latest antics. Emily found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, the tension in her shoulders easing with each shared joke. "You're good at this," Emily said, nodding toward the vegetables Alex had neatly diced. "I might have to recruit you as my permanent kitchen assistant." "Happy to help," Alex replied, his eyes meeting hers. "It's nice spending time with you." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. It was a simple sentiment, but one she hadn't heard in far too long. Mark's compliments had become rare, his attention fleeting, and Chloe's teenage moodiness often left Emily feeling invisible. But Alex saw her. He always had. As they finished preparing dinner, Alex reached out to hand Emily a bowl of salad. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Emily felt a jolt of something she couldn't quite name. She quickly dismissed it, chalking it up to her overactive imagination. Dinner that night was quieter than usual. Mark was late, as expected, and Chloe had barely looked up from her phone. Emily and Alex carried the conversation, their easy banter filling the silence. When Mark finally arrived, he offered a distracted apology before diving into his plate, his focus once again on his phone. "Dad, you should put that away during dinner," Alex said, his tone firm but respectful. Mark looked up, startled, before setting his phone down with a sigh. "You're right. Sorry." Emily glanced at Alex, her heart swelling with gratitude. He had a way of stepping in when she needed support, of noticing the little things that others missed. It was a quality she admired, though she told herself it was simply a sign of his maturity. Later that evening, as Emily cleaned up the kitchen, Alex joined her again. He leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, and watched her with a thoughtful expression. "You shouldn't have to do all of this on your own," he said. Emily shrugged, wiping her hands on a towel. "It's just part of being a mom." "That doesn't mean you have to carry everything," Alex replied. "You deserve to be taken care of too." Emily froze for a moment, his words hitting her harder than she expected. She turned to him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of insincerity, but found none. "Thank you, Alex," she said softly. "That means a lot." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to fade away. Emily quickly broke the gaze, busying herself with putting away the dishes. But the feeling lingered, a warmth that spread through her chest and left her both comforted and confused. As the days went on, Emily found herself looking forward to the moments she spent with Alex. Whether it was a quick chat in the kitchen or a walk around the neighborhood, his presence had become a source of solace in her otherwise lonely days. She told herself it was normal, that every parent cherished their relationship with their children. But deep down, she knew there was something different about the way she felt. One afternoon, as Emily and Alex walked along the beach, the sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the silence between them. Emily loved the ocean. It was her place of peace, where she could clear her mind and reflect. Alex walked beside her, his hands shoved into his pockets as he glanced at her. "You seem happier lately," he said, his voice thoughtful. Emily looked at him, startled. "Do I?" Alex nodded. "Yeah. I think it's because you've been spending more time doing things you enjoy." "Like this." Emily smiled, though the comment left her feeling unsettled. She hadn't realized how much her happiness had become tied to her time with Alex. "Maybe," she said softly. "It's nice to have someone to share these moments with." They continued walking, the conversation light and easy. But as the sun began to set, casting the beach in a warm golden glow, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her relationship with Alex was changing. It wasn't something she could name or define, but it lingered in the air between them, unspoken yet undeniable. That night, as Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts were a tangled web of emotions. She knew she was treading dangerous waters, but she couldn't bring herself to pull away. The connection she felt with Alex was unlike anything she had experienced in years, and it filled a void she hadn't realized was so deep. The lines between them were beginning to blur, and Emily knew it was only a matter of time before the truth became impossible to ignore. The Carter household had always been a place of routine. Days passed with predictable monotony. Breakfast at 7, school and work from 8 to 5, dinner together, when Mark's schedule allowed, and evenings spent in quiet solitude. But lately, the rhythms of the household were changing, and Emily felt herself caught in a tide she couldn't control. It was a Thursday evening when Emily first noticed the shift. Mark had called to say he'd be working late again, and Chloe was holed up in her room, headphones on, scrolling through social media. Emily had grown used to these quiet evenings, but tonight felt different. As she sat in the living room, the soft hum of the TV filling the silence, Alex joined her, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "I thought you could use this," he said, setting one mug on the coffee table in front of her. Emily smiled, her heart warming at the gesture. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's so thoughtful of you." Alex sat down beside her, his presence filling the empty space on the couch. They sipped their drinks in comfortable silence, the glow of the television casting soft shadows across the room. Emily couldn't remember the last time she had felt this at ease. Alex had a way of making her feel seen, a quality she had always appreciated but now found herself relying on. "What are we watching?" Alex asked, glancing at the screen. "Just an old movie," Emily replied. "Something to pass the time." Alex nodded, leaning back against the cushions. "Mind if I join you?" "Of course not," Emily said, her smile widening. "I'd love the company." As the movie played on, Emily found herself more focused on Alex than the screen. She noticed the way he laughed at the jokes, his deep voice resonating in the quiet room. She noticed the way he glanced at her occasionally, as though checking to see if she was enjoying herself. It was a simple moment, but it filled her with a sense of connection she hadn't felt in years. Halfway through the movie, Emily leaned over to grab a blanket from the armrest. As she shifted, her shoulder brushed against Alex's. The contact was brief but sent a jolt through her, a warmth that lingered long after she settled back into her seat. She told herself it was nothing, just a moment of closeness between a mother and her son. But her heart betrayed her, beating faster than it should have. "You okay?" Alex asked, noticing the slight flush on her cheeks. "I'm fine," Emily replied quickly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Just a little warm, that's all." Alex didn't press further, turning his attention back to the movie. But Emily couldn't focus. Her thoughts raced, and she found herself questioning everything. Her feelings, her actions, and the growing bond between her and Alex. The following days were a blur of confusion and self-doubt. Emily tried to convince herself that her closeness with Alex was normal, that it was simply the result of spending more time together. But deep down, she knew that wasn't the whole truth. She couldn't ignore the way her heart fluttered when he smiled at her, or the way her pulse quickened when their hands brushed. One evening, as Emily prepared dinner, Alex entered the kitchen and leaned against the counter. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice soft. Emily hesitated, her mind still racing with the thoughts she had been trying to suppress. "Sure," she said finally, handing him a cutting board and a knife. "You can chop the vegetables." They worked in silence for a while, the rhythmic sounds of chopping and stirring filling the room. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, an unspoken connection lingering between them. "Mom," Alex said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Emily replied, her heart skipping a beat. "Are you happy?" he asked, his tone earnest. "I mean really happy." Emily froze, the question catching her off guard. She set down the wooden spoon she had been using and turned to face him. "Why do you ask?" Alex shrugged, his gaze steady. "I don't know. You just seem different lately. Like you're carrying a lot on your shoulders." Emily sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's not that simple, Alex. Life gets complicated as you get older." Alex stepped closer, his expression soft. "You don't have to go through it alone, Mom. I'm here for you." His words brought tears to Emily's eyes. She looked at him, her heart aching with a mix of gratitude and guilt. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to stand still. Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest, a connection that both comforted and unsettled her. She quickly turned back to the stove, focusing on stirring the sauce as her mind raced. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that her relationship with Alex was changing. It wasn't something she could name or define, but it lingered in the air between them, unspoken yet undeniable. The next day, Emily decided to clear her mind with a walk along the beach. She invited Alex to join her, hoping the fresh air and open space would help her regain perspective. The ocean was calm, the waves lapping gently at the shore as they walked side by side. "It's beautiful out here," Alex said, breaking the silence. Emily nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's always been my favorite place to think." "Do you come here often?" Alex asked. Not as much as I'd like to, Emily admitted. Life gets in the way. Alex stopped walking and turned to her. His expression thoughtful. Maybe we should come here more often. Together. Emily smiled, though her heart felt heavy. I'd like that. As they continued walking, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. The subtle shift in their relationship was undeniable, and she didn't know how to stop it, or if she even wanted to. That evening, as they sat on the couch watching TV, Alex reached out and took Emily's hand in his. The gesture was simple, yet it sent a wave of emotion crashing over her. Emily looked at him, her breath catching in her throat. "Thank you for today," Alex said softly. "It meant a lot." Emily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It meant a lot to me too." The lines between them were becoming increasingly blurred, and Emily knew it was only a matter of time before they were forced to confront the truth. The days turned into weeks, and the Carter household continued its quiet routine, though Emily couldn't ignore the growing closeness between herself and Alex. Their bond had always been strong, but lately it felt different, deeper, more intimate, and undeniably complicated. Emily told herself that it was normal for a mother and son to share a close relationship, especially in the absence of Mark's presence and Chloe's detachment. But the way her heart raced when Alex looked at her suggested otherwise. One evening, as Emily prepared dinner, the house was unusually quiet. Mark was working late as usual, and Chloe had gone to a friend's house for the weekend. Alex entered the kitchen, his steps light but purposeful. "Need any help?" he asked, his tone familiar yet carrying an undertone of something Emily couldn't quite place. Emily glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You're always so eager to help these days. I might start putting you to work full-time." Alex chuckled, stepping closer to the counter. "I don't mind. I like spending time with you." The sincerity in his voice made Emily's chest tighten. She handed him a cutting board and a knife, trying to focus on the task at hand. "You can chop the vegetables," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. As they worked side by side, the rhythmic sounds of chopping and stirring filled the air. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on everything from Alex's classes to Emily's favorite recipes. But beneath the surface of their light-hearted banter, an unspoken tension lingered, a connection that neither of them dared to acknowledge. At one point, Alex reached for a carrot at the same time Emily did, their hands brushing briefly. Emily froze, her breath hitching as their eyes met. The moment was fleeting, but it felt charged, as though the air between them had shifted. "Sorry," Alex murmured, his voice low. "It's okay," Emily replied quickly, turning her attention back to the stove. But her mind raced, replaying the moment over and over. After dinner, they found themselves in the living room, the soft glow of the TV casting shadows across the walls. Emily sat on the couch with a glass of wine, while Alex lounged nearby, scrolling through his phone. The atmosphere was relaxed, yet Emily couldn't shake the tension that had settled in her chest. "Want to watch something?" Alex asked, setting his phone aside. "Sure," Emily said, grateful for the distraction. "You pick." Alex selected a light-hearted comedy, and they settled in to watch. As the movie played, Emily felt herself relax, the laughter easing some of the tension she had been carrying. But when Alex shifted closer, draping an arm along the back of the couch, her heart began to race again. "You okay?" Alex asked, his gaze flickering to her. "I'm fine," Emily said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." "You've been saying that a lot lately," Alex remarked, his tone gentle. "Are you sure everything's okay?" Emily hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I guess I've just been feeling off. It's hard to explain." Alex's expression softened. "You don't have to explain. I'm here if you need me." The words hung in the air, simple yet heavy with meaning. Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of gratitude and something else, something she didn't want to name. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot." Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to fade away. Emily felt a pull toward Alex, a connection that was both comforting and unsettling. She quickly looked away, focusing on the screen as her thoughts raced. The next morning, Emily decided to clear her head with a walk along the beach. She invited Alex to join her, hoping the fresh air and open space would help her regain perspective. The ocean was calm, the waves gently lapping at the shore as they walked side by side. "This is nice," Alex said, his hands tucked into his pockets. "I can see why you like it here." Emily smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's always been my favorite place to think. Something about the ocean just clears my mind." "Do you come here often?" Alex asked, glancing at her. "Not as much as I used to," Emily admitted. "Life gets in the way." Alex stopped walking and turned to face her. "Maybe we should come here more often. Together." Emily's heart skipped a beat at his words. She nodded, her smile faltering slightly. "I'd like that." As they continued their walk, their conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. The connection she felt with Alex was undeniable, and it scared her. That evening, as they sat on the couch watching TV, Alex reached out and took Emily's hand in his. The gesture was simple, yet it sent a wave of emotion crashing over her. Emily looked at him, her breath catching in her throat. "Thank you for today," Alex said softly. "It meant a lot." Emily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "It meant a lot to me too." The lines between them were becoming increasingly blurred, and Emily knew it was only a matter of time before they were forced to confront the truth. The following days were filled with moments like these. Small, seemingly innocent gestures that carried an undeniable weight. Emily found herself seeking out Alex's company, drawn to the warmth and understanding he offered. And Alex, in turn, seemed to gravitate toward her, finding comfort in their shared moments. But with each passing day, the tension between them grew. Emily knew that they were treading dangerous waters, that their bond was crossing lines that should never be crossed. Yet she couldn't bring herself to pull away. The connection she felt with Alex was unlike anything she had experienced in years, and it filled a void she hadn't realized was so deep. As Emily lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, she found herself grappling with feelings she couldn't fully understand. She knew that what was happening between her and Alex was wrong, but she also knew that it was real. And as much as she wanted to deny it, she couldn't ignore the truth. Their relationship had changed, and there was no going back. The tension in the Carter household was no longer just an undercurrent. It was palpable, woven into every interaction between Emily and Alex. Their unspoken connection had grown stronger, and with each passing day, the line between mother and son blurred further. Emily tried to convince herself that it was harmless, that they were simply spending more time together. But deep down she knew better. It was a quiet Saturday evening. Chloe had gone out with friends, and Mark, as always, was working late. Emily was in the kitchen baking cookies, a rare indulgence she hadn't made time for in years. The scent of vanilla and chocolate filled the air, a nostalgic reminder of simpler times. Alex walked in, drawn by the aroma. "That smells amazing," he said, leaning against the counter. Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I thought it'd be nice to do something fun for a change." "Want to help?" "Always," Alex replied, grabbing an apron from the hook. He tied it around his waist and washed his hands before joining her at the counter. They worked side by side, laughing as they mixed the dough and debated over the perfect ratio of chocolate chips. Emily felt a warmth in her chest, a happiness she hadn't experienced in a long time. For a moment, the weight of her guilt and confusion lifted, replaced by the simple joy of being in Alex's company. "You've got flour on your face," Alex said, his eyes crinkling with amusement. Emily laughed, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. "Well, baking is messy business." Alex reached out, his thumb brushing against her cheek to remove a stray bit of flour. The touch was brief but sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She froze, her heart pounding as their eyes met. "Thanks," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anytime," Alex replied, his gaze lingering on hers. The moment stretched on, heavy with unspoken words. Emily felt her breath quicken, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't voice. She knew she should step back, create distance, but she found herself unable to move. "Mom," Alex began, his tone hesitant. "Are you happy?" The question caught Emily off guard, and she looked away, focusing on the dough in front of her. "That's a complicated question," she said finally. "Why does it have to be?" Alex pressed, his voice gentle. "You deserve to be happy. You deserve someone who makes you feel loved." Emily swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she shaped the cookies. "Alex, sigh." "You don't have to answer," Alex interrupted, his tone soft. "I just want you to know that I'm here for you. Always." Emily looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking. "That means more than you know." They finished baking the cookies in silence, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. When the last tray was in the oven, Emily leaned against the counter, exhaustion washing over her. "You should go rest," Alex said, his concern evident. "I'll clean up." Emily shook her head. "I can't let you do that. You've already helped enough." "Mom," Alex said firmly, stepping closer. "Let me take care of you for once." His words sent a wave of emotion crashing over Emily, and she felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and left the kitchen. As she lay on the couch, the scent of cookies wafting through the air, Emily replayed the evening in her mind. The way Alex had looked at her, the sincerity in his voice, the warmth of his touch. It was all too much and yet not enough. She knew she was treading dangerous waters, but the connection she felt with Alex was intoxicating, filling a void she hadn't realized was so deep. Later that night, as the house settled into silence, Alex joined Emily in the living room. He sat beside her, the space between them smaller than it had been before. "Cookies turned out great," he said, holding up a plate. Emily smiled, taking one. "They taste even better when you don't have to clean up the mess." Alex chuckled, his laughter light and genuine. "I'll remember that for next time." They ate in comfortable silence, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background. Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years, but it was accompanied by a growing unease. She knew she needed to set boundaries, to address the feelings that had been building between them. But a part of her didn't want to let go of the connection they shared. "Thank you for tonight," Emily said finally, her voice soft. "It was nice." "Any time, Mom," Alex replied, his gaze steady. "I mean it." Emily looked at him, her heart aching with a mix of gratitude and guilt. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You don't have to," Alex said, his voice firm. "I'll always be here for you." The sincerity in his words brought tears to Emily's eyes, and she quickly looked away, focusing on the cookie in her hand. The silence between them grew heavier, the unspoken emotions swirling like a storm. As the clock struck midnight, Alex stood stretching. "I should get some sleep," he said, his tone reluctant. Emily nodded, her voice catching in her throat. "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Mom," Alex said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. The gesture was innocent, but the warmth it left lingered long after he had gone. Emily sat alone in the living room, her thoughts a tangled web of guilt, longing and confusion. She knew she was crossing a line, one that could never be uncrossed. But the connection she felt with Alex was unlike anything she had experienced in years, and it filled her with both hope and despair. As the night stretched on, Emily made a silent promise to herself. She would find a way to fix this, to set things right. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be easy. The lines between them had already begun to blur, and the road ahead was fraught with challenges she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The quiet tension that had been simmering in the Carter household finally reached a boiling point. Emily knew it was inevitable. The boundaries she and Alex had blurred were becoming impossible to ignore, and the weight of their unspoken connection grew heavier with each passing day. Mark had begun to notice the changes, though he hadn't yet voiced his suspicions. His long hours at the office were often followed by evenings spent quietly observing his family, his eyes lingering on Emily and Alex longer than usual. Chloe, too, seemed to sense that something was amiss. She spent less time at home, retreating to the safety of her friends and social life to avoid the growing tension. It was a Friday evening when everything came to a head. Mark had arrived home early for once, a rare occurrence that caught Emily off guard. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he entered, his expression unreadable. "Hey," he said, setting his briefcase down. "Smells good in here." "Thanks," Emily replied, her voice strained. "I'm making lasagna." Mark nodded, leaning against the counter. "Where's everyone else?" "Chloe's at a friend's house," Emily said, focusing on the sauce simmering on the stove. "Alex should be home soon." As if on cue, the front door opened and Alex walked in, his footsteps light against the hardwood floor. "Hey, Mom," he called out, his voice carrying a warmth that made Emily's heart ache. "In here," she replied, glancing at Mark nervously. Alex entered the kitchen, his smile faltering slightly when he saw his father. "Hey, Dad. Didn't know you'd be home early." "Surprise," Mark said, his tone flat. He watched as Alex moved to help Emily, their interactions natural but carrying an undercurrent of familiarity that made Mark's stomach churn. The three of them sat down for dinner, the air thick with unspoken words. Mark's gaze shifted between Emily and Alex, his suspicion growing with every shared glance and subtle touch. He didn't say anything at first, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable. "So, Alex," Mark said suddenly, his voice sharp, "you've been spending a lot of time with your mother lately." Alex looked up, startled. Yeah, I guess." Mark's eyes narrowed. "Don't you think it's a little unusual?" Emily froze, her fork hovering mid-air. "Mark, what are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Mark replied, his tone laced with accusation. "The way you two act around each other. It's not normal." Alex's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. "Dad, that's enough." "No, it's not enough," Mark snapped, his voice rising. "I've been watching you two for weeks, and I know something's going on." Emily felt her heart pounding in her chest. "Mark, you're imagining things. There's nothing going on." "Don't lie to me, Emily," Mark said, his eyes blazing. "I'm not stupid." The room fell silent, the weight of Mark's words pressing down on them. Chloe chose that moment to walk in, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mark turned to her, his expression hard. "Ask your mother." "Chloe, please," Emily began, but Mark cut her off. "She deserves to know the truth," he said coldly. "Tell her, Emily. Or I will." Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at Alex, who was staring at his father with a mixture of anger and guilt. "Chloe," Emily said, her voice cracking, "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake." Chloe's face paled, and she took a step back. "What are you talking about?" "Your mother and Alex," Mark said, his voice dripping with disgust. "They've been too close." Chloe's eyes widened, and she looked at Alex in disbelief. "Is that true?" Alex stood, his fists clenched. "It's not like that, Chloe. I swear." "Then what is it like?" Chloe demanded, her voice rising. "Because it sure doesn't look innocent." Emily buried her face in her hands, sobs racking her body. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for this to happen." Mark stood as well, his face contorted with rage. "You've destroyed this family, Emily. Do you realize that? You've ruined everything." Chloe turned and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Mark followed, leaving Emily and Alex alone in the kitchen. "Mom," Alex said softly, reaching for her. "I'm sorry." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Alex. This is my fault. I should have stopped it before it got this far." "I'm just as much to blame," Alex replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have known better." The sound of Mark's voice yelling upstairs made Emily flinch. She knew she couldn't fix what had just happened, but she also knew that she couldn't let it end this way. "We need to face this," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Together." Alex nodded, his jaw set. "I'm with you, Mom. Whatever happens, we'll get through it." As the night wore on, the house remained tense and filled with the echoes of anger and betrayal. Emily knew that their family would never be the same, but she also knew that they couldn't move forward without confronting the truth. The breaking point had come, and there was no turning back. The Carter household was no longer a home. It was a battlefield. The emotional fallout from the explosive confrontation hung heavily in the air, saturating every room with tension and despair. Mark's furious accusations, Chloe's disbelief, and Emily's broken confessions had left the family fractured in a way that felt irreparable. The next morning, the house was eerily silent. Emily sat alone at the kitchen table, nursing a cold cup of coffee. She hadn't slept. Her mind replayed the events of the previous night in excruciating detail. Every word, every look, every tear seemed etched into her memory. She felt hollow, like a shell of the person she had once been. The sound of footsteps broke the silence, and Emily looked up to see Chloe entering the kitchen. Her daughter's face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Emily's heart ached as she watched Chloe pour herself a glass of water and sit down across from her without a word. "Chloe," Emily began, her voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But please let me explain." Chloe's gaze was cold, her tone sharper than Emily had ever heard. "Explain what, Mom?" "That you destroyed our family. That you betrayed Dad and me." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she forced herself to meet Chloe's glare. "I made a mistake. Terrible mistake. But I never stopped loving you or your father." "Love?" Chloe scoffed, her voice rising. "Do you even know what that means? Because it sure doesn't look like it." Emily flinched, the words cutting her like a knife. "Chloe, please. I'll do anything to make this right." "You can't fix this," Chloe snapped, standing abruptly. "You've ruined everything." Emily reached for her, but Chloe pulled away, her expression filled with a mix of anger and pain. "I can't even look at you right now," she said before storming out of the room. As the door slammed shut, Emily collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. The weight of Chloe's words crushed her, and she realized just how much damage she had caused. She had not only lost her husband but was on the brink of losing her daughter as well. Meanwhile, Mark had retreated to the guest room, where he spent the night seething in silence. He couldn't bring himself to look at Emily or Alex, let alone speak to them. His mind was a whirlwind of betrayal and anger, but beneath it all was an undercurrent of heartbreak. The woman he had loved, the mother of his children, had shattered the foundation of their family. When Mark finally emerged later that morning, he found Alex in the living room, sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. The sight of his son, the very person who had been part of the betrayal, filled Mark with a mix of rage and sadness. "Alex," Mark said, his voice cold. "We need to talk." Alex looked up, his eyes bloodshot and filled with guilt. "I know, Dad. I'm so sorry." Mark crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "Sorry doesn't begin to cover it. How could you do this to your own family? To your mother?" "I don't have an excuse," Alex admitted, his voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I don't know how it happened." Mark's hands balled into fists at his sides, his anger barely contained. "You don't know how it happened. You crossed a line that should never have been crossed, Alex. You betrayed me. You betrayed this family." Alex lowered his gaze, his shame palpable. "I know I did. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Mark took a step closer, his voice rising. "Do you even understand what you've done? You've destroyed our trust, our home, everything we've built." Alex stood, his posture tense but his voice steady. "I know I messed up, Dad. But I'm not the only one to blame. This didn't happen in a vacuum." Mark's expression darkened, his anger boiling over. "Don't you dare try to shift the blame. You're just as responsible as she is. I'm not shifting the blame, Alex replied, his voice firm. I'm taking responsibility. But so should you. You've been so consumed with work that you didn't even notice what was happening in your own home. Mark's face twisted in anger, but Alex's words struck a chord. For a moment, the fury in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something more vulnerable. That doesn't excuse what you did, he said finally, his voice quieter. I know, Alex said. And I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. But we have to face it together. Mark didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Alex alone with his thoughts. The rest of the day passed in a haze of silence and avoidance. Emily tried to approach Mark several times, but each attempt was met with a cold dismissal. Chloe stayed locked in her room, refusing to speak to anyone. Alex spent the afternoon outside, pacing the backyard as he grappled with the weight of his actions. By evening, Emily decided that she couldn't let the day end without addressing the elephant in the room. She called everyone into the living room, her voice trembling but determined. We need to talk, she said, her gaze moving between Mark, Chloe, and Alex. We can't keep avoiding this. If we want any chance of moving forward, we have to face it. Mark crossed his arms, his expression hard. What's there to talk about? You've already destroyed everything. There's plenty to talk about, Emily said, her voice breaking. We're a family, and we owe it to each other to try to fix this. Chloe scoffed, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Why should we even try? You're the one who broke us. I know I did, Emily said, tears streaming down her face. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. But I need you to meet me halfway. Mark sighed heavily, his anger tempered by exhaustion. Emily, I don't know if I can ever forgive you. But for the sake of the kids, I'm willing to try. Chloe's gaze softened slightly, though her voice was still laced with pain. I don't know if I can forgive you either. But I'll try. For Dad. Alex spoke last, his voice steady but filled with remorse. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I just want us to be a family again. The room fell silent, the weight of their collective pain pressing down on them. It was a fragile moment, but it was also a beginning, a tentative step toward healing. The Carter household was no longer filled with the warmth it once had, but after the tense confrontation in the living room, a fragile truce seemed to settle over the family. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a tentative agreement to try, to take the first cautious steps toward piecing together what had been broken. Emily woke up early the next morning, her mind heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. She brewed a pot of coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen, and sat down at the table with a notebook. She needed a plan, a way to rebuild trust with her family. But where to begin? Mark entered the kitchen a few minutes later, his steps heavy. He glanced at Emily, his expression weary but not as cold as it had been the day before. Morning, he said gruffly, grabbing a mug and pouring himself some coffee. Morning, Emily replied softly, her hands gripping her own mug tightly. She hesitated before speaking again. Mark, I know things are strained right now, but I want you to know that I'm committed to fixing this. To fixing us. Mark sighed, leaning against the counter. I don't even know where to start, Emily. What you did. It's not something you just fix with a few apologies. I know, Emily said, her voice trembling. And I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I'm willing to put in the work. For the kids. Mark was silent for a long moment before nodding slightly. We'll see. Actions speak louder than words. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later that day, Emily decided to reach out to Chloe. Her daughter had been avoiding her since the confrontation, barely speaking a word and retreating to her room whenever Emily was near. Emily knew that reconnecting with Chloe would take time, but she had to try. She knocked gently on Chloe's door. Chloe, can I come in? There was no response at first, but after a moment, Emily heard the faint shuffle of footsteps. The door opened slightly, and Chloe's face appeared, her expression guarded. What do you want? Chloe asked, her tone flat. I just want to talk, Emily said, her voice soft. Can I come in? Chloe hesitated before stepping aside and letting her in. Emily sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. Chloe, I know I've hurt you, Emily began, her voice shaking. And I know I can't undo what I've done. But I want you to know how sorry I am. For everything. Chloe crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. Sorry doesn't fix anything, Mom. You broke Dad's heart. You broke this family. Emily felt tears sting her eyes, but she forced herself to hold Chloe's gaze. No. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. But I need you to know that I love you. More than anything. Chloe's expression softened slightly, though her tone remained wary. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Emily nodded, her voice trembling. That's okay. Take all the time you need. I just want you to know that I'm here for you no matter what. Chloe was quiet for a long moment before finally speaking. I miss how things used to be. Me too, Emily said, her voice breaking. And I want to do whatever it takes to get back to that. If you'll let me. Chloe didn't respond, but she didn't ask Emily to leave either. For Emily that was enough for now. While Emily worked to rebuild her relationships with Mark and Chloe, Alex took a different approach. He had always been close to his mother, and the guilt of their shared mistakes weighed heavily on him. He decided to focus on repairing his relationship with his father, hoping it might help bridge the gap between their fractured family. One afternoon, Alex found Mark in the garage, tinkering with an old lawnmower. Mark had always found solace in fixing things, and Alex hoped it might provide an opportunity to connect. Need any help? Alex asked, stepping into the garage. Mark glanced at him, his expression unreadable. Depends. You know anything about engines? Not much, Alex admitted. But I'm a quick learner. Mark sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. Grab the wrench. Alex joined him, watching closely as Mark explained the mechanics of the engine. They worked in relative silence, the occasional question or instruction breaking the quiet. It wasn't much, but it was the most they had spoken since the confrontation. After an hour, Mark leaned back, his hands on his hips. Not bad, he said, nodding at the partially fixed lawnmower. You've got a good eye for detail. Thanks, Alex said, a small smile tugging at his lips. I guess I get it from you. Mark's expression softened slightly, though his eyes were still filled with a mix of emotions. Alex, about everything that's happened. I know, Alex said quickly, his voice steady. Messed up. Big time. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Mark nodded slowly. Good. Regret's a start. But actions matter more. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, Alex said earnestly. To fix us. Mark was silent for a moment before nodding again. We'll see. Over the next few weeks, the Carter family began to find a new rhythm. It wasn't the same as before. Too much had happened for things to ever go back to the way they were. But there were glimmers of hope. Emily and Mark started attending counseling sessions, where they confronted the pain and resentment that had built up over the years. The sessions were difficult, forcing them to face uncomfortable truths about their marriage and themselves. But they were also a step forward, a sign that they were willing to try. Chloe, though still distant, began to spend more time at home. She didn't speak to Emily much, but she no longer avoided her entirely. And while her relationship with Alex remained strained, she occasionally joined him for a movie or a board game, small moments that hinted at the possibility of reconciliation. Alex focused on his studies and tried to keep a low profile, giving his family the space they needed to heal. He knew that rebuilding trust would take time, but he was determined to prove that he was committed to making things right. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Mark reading a book, Chloe scrolling through her phone, and Alex playing a video game, Emily felt a sense of hope. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that they might be able to find their way back to each other. The road ahead was uncertain, but the Carter family was taking the first steps toward healing. Together. The Carter family's tentative steps toward healing were fragile, like walking on cracked ice. Each movement was careful, deliberate, and fraught with the fear that everything could shatter again. Emily clung to the hope that they could rebuild, but she also knew that the wound she had caused ran deep, and healing would take more than time. It required trust, patience, and unwavering determination. One of Emily's first steps was re-establishing her relationship with Mark. Their counseling sessions had forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about their marriage. Years of neglect, unspoken resentments, and a growing emotional distance. Emily realized just how much she had relied on Alex to fill the void that Mark's absence had created. And Mark began to see how his relentless focus on work had left Emily feeling invisible. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Emily and Mark sat together in the living room. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words, but Emily knew she couldn't let the silence linger. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling, "I know I've hurt you in ways I can never fully make up for. But I want to try. I want us to try." Mark set down the book he had been pretending to read and looked at her. His expression weary but open. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Emily," he admitted. "But I also don't want to throw away everything we've built. I'm willing to try, for the sake of our family." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and she nodded. "That's all I can ask for. Thank you, Mark." Their conversation wasn't a resolution. It was a beginning. Over the following weeks, they worked to find moments of connection amidst the tension. Mark began coming home earlier from work, and Emily made an effort to be more present and attentive. They started having dinner together as a family again, and while the atmosphere was often strained, it was a step toward rebuilding the bonds that had been broken. For Chloe, the path to forgiveness was far more difficult. She struggled to reconcile the mother she had always admired with the person who had betrayed their family. Her anger often manifested in sharp words and cold silences, but underneath it all was a deep sadness, a longing for the family she once knew. One afternoon, Emily knocked on Chloe's door, holding a tray with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Chloe, can I come in?" After a long pause, Chloe's voice came from inside. "Fine." Emily entered cautiously, setting the tray down on Chloe's desk. "I made your favorite," she said softly, gesturing to the hot chocolate topped with whipped cream and sprinkles. Chloe looked at the mug but didn't pick it up. "What do you want, Mom?" "I just want to talk," Emily said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I know things haven't been easy between us, and I don't blame you for being angry. But I miss you, Chloe. I miss talking to you." Chloe crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "You should have thought about that before you ruined everything." Emily nodded, her chest tightening at the harshness of Chloe's words. "You're right. I made a terrible mistake. But I'm trying to make things right, Chloe. For you, for Dad, for Alex. For all of us." Chloe was silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "Do you even regret it? Or are you just sorry because you got caught?" Emily felt tears sting her eyes, but she forced herself to meet Chloe's gaze. "I regret everything, Chloe. Not just because I got caught, but because I hurt the people I love most in the world. And I'll carry that regret for the rest of my life." Chloe's expression softened slightly, though her voice was still wary. "I don't know if I can forgive you." "That's okay," Emily said, her voice breaking. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." Chloe didn't respond, but she picked up the mug of hot chocolate and took a small sip. For Emily, it was a glimmer of hope, a fragile but meaningful step forward. Alex, meanwhile, struggled with his own guilt and the fallout from his actions. He had always been close to his mother, but the line they had crossed haunted him. He felt a deep responsibility to help his family heal, even if it meant stepping back and giving them space. One evening, Alex approached Chloe in the living room, where she was scrolling through her phone. "Hey," he said cautiously. "Can we talk?" Chloe glanced at him, her expression skeptical. "About what?" "About everything," Alex said, sitting down beside her. "I know I messed up, Chloe. Big time. And I hate that I hurt you and Mom and Dad." Chloe's eyes narrowed. "You think saying sorry is enough?" "No," Alex said firmly. "I don't. But I want to make things right." I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Chloe sighed, setting her phone down. I don't even know if this family can be fixed, Alex. Everything's so messed up. I know it feels that way, Alex said. But we can try. That's all I'm asking, for a chance to try. Chloe was quiet for a long moment before nodding slightly. Fine. But it's going to take a lot more than just words. Alex nodded, relief washing over him. No. And I'm ready to do the work. Over the following weeks, the Carter family began to find moments of connection amidst the chaos. Emily and Mark continued their counseling sessions, where they worked to rebuild their trust and understand the dynamics that had led to their fractured marriage. Chloe started spending more time at home, though she remained guarded and distant. Alex focused on his studies and took on more responsibilities around the house, hoping to ease the burden on his parents. He also made an effort to reconnect with Chloe, joining her for board games and movie nights, and slowly rebuilding the bond they had once shared. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Mark reading a book, Emily working on her laptop, Chloe scrolling through her phone, and Alex playing a video game, there was a sense of tentative peace. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. Emily looked around the room, her heart swelling with gratitude and hope. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time in a long time, she believed that they might be able to find their way back to each other. The Carter household was far from the harmonious sanctuary it had once been, but slowly, cracks in their family dynamic were being filled, not with perfection, but with the glue of effort, vulnerability, and a shared desire to heal. Each member of the family carried their own scars from the betrayal that had fractured their relationships, but in those scars lay the foundation for a new beginning. Emily woke early on a crisp Saturday morning, the sunlight streaming through the curtains of the master bedroom she had returned to after many weeks of sleeping alone. Mark had allowed her back into the space they had once shared, though the distance between them was still tangible. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was progress. As she padded into the kitchen to start breakfast, Emily thought about the journey they had all been on. She had hurt her family deeply, but she had also seen the beginnings of resilience in each of them. Chloe's hesitant willingness to stay in the same room as her, Mark's small but consistent gestures of rebuilding their partnership, and Alex's quiet determination to support everyone while carrying the weight of his own guilt. She pulled out the ingredients for pancakes, deciding to make a family breakfast like they used to have in happier times. The act felt symbolic, a way to bring them all to the table, both literally and figuratively. Mark was the first to come downstairs, drawn by the smell of sizzling bacon. He paused in the doorway, watching Emily as she flipped pancakes with a focused expression. "Good morning," he said, his tone still guarded but less cold than before. Emily turned, a small smile on her lips. "Good morning. I thought I'd make breakfast for everyone." Mark nodded, stepping into the kitchen and pouring himself a cup of coffee. He leaned against the counter, watching her work. "You always did make the best pancakes." The compliment caught Emily off guard, and she felt a flicker of hope. "Thank you," she said softly. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them less tense than it had been in weeks. Mark finally spoke, his voice hesitant. "You've been trying. Can see that." Emily looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "Have been. And I'll keep trying for as long as it takes." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We've got a long way to go. But I'm willing to keep trying too." It wasn't an outright declaration of forgiveness, but it was enough for Emily to feel like they were on the right path. By the time Chloe and Alex came downstairs, the table was set, and breakfast was ready. Chloe hesitated in the doorway, her eyes flicking between her parents and her brother. "What's all this?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Just a family breakfast," Emily said, gesturing to the table. "I thought it would be nice for all of us to sit down together." Chloe shrugged, her walls still firmly in place, but she sat down nonetheless. Alex followed suit, taking the seat next to her. The meal started in awkward silence, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware and the occasional clearing of a throat. But as they ate, the tension began to ease. Alex cracked a joke about his failed attempt at baking cookies the week before, and Chloe couldn't suppress a small laugh. Mark shared a story about a mishap at work, and even Emily joined in with a light-hearted comment. By the end of breakfast, the atmosphere was almost comfortable. It wasn't the warm, easy dynamic they had once shared, but it was a start, a fragile but meaningful step toward healing. As the day unfolded, the family found themselves spending more time together than they had in months. Chloe suggested a game of Scrabble, and though she claimed it was just to show everyone who the real wordsmith is, Emily could see the effort she was making to engage. Alex joined in eagerly, and even Mark seemed to enjoy the light-hearted competition. Later in the afternoon, the family decided to take a walk along the beach. It was a place that had always brought Emily solace, and she hoped it would do the same for her family. The ocean breeze was crisp and invigorating, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore provided a soothing backdrop to their tentative conversations. As they walked, Chloe lagged behind with Alex, their voices low as they talked. Emily glanced back, her heart swelling at the sight of her children reconnecting. She turned to Mark, who was walking beside her, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. "They're starting to heal," Emily said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. Mark nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "They're stronger than we give them credit for." Emily hesitated before reaching out to take his hand. He stiffened slightly but didn't pull away. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, a sign that, despite everything, there was still a thread of connection between them. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the family gathered in the living room. Mark built a fire in the fireplace, and Chloe and Alex brought out blankets and mugs of hot chocolate. They sat together, the glow of the fire casting warm light across their faces. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the same as before. Too much had happened for things to ever return to the way they were. But it was a new kind of peace, one born from the resilience and effort they had all shown in the face of unimaginable pain. Emily looked around the room, her heart swelling with gratitude. She knew there was still a long way to go, and the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But for the first time in a long time, she believed they could navigate it together. As the fire crackled and the sound of laughter filled the room, Emily allowed herself to hope. Not for perfection, but for a future where they could coexist as a family that had been broken but was determined to rebuild. Mark Carter sat in the dim light of his study, the whiskey in his hand swirling lazily in the glass. The events of the past few weeks had left him reeling, his once steadfast world shaken to its core. Emily's betrayal wasn't just an emotional wound, it was a fracture in the foundation of their family. And yet, beneath his anger and disappointment, Mark couldn't deny the pangs of love that lingered. Love for the woman who had been his partner for over 2 decades. Love for the family he had worked tirelessly to build. But was love enough to overcome this betrayal? As he stared at the photograph on his desk, a picture from a family trip to Yellowstone a few summers ago, Mark felt a lump rise in his throat. In the image, they were all smiling, standing together against the backdrop of a stunning waterfall. Emily had her arms wrapped around Chloe, while Alex and Mark stood shoulder to shoulder, looking every bit the picture of a united family. Mark couldn't reconcile that image with the reality they now faced. How had they gone from that to this? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Mark set down his glass and cleared his throat. "Come in." Emily stepped into the room, her face pale and drawn. "Mark," she began hesitantly. "Do you have a minute?" Mark stiffened, his emotions warring within him. He wanted to shut her out, to tell her that he didn't have time for this conversation. But he also knew that avoiding her wouldn't solve anything. With a curt nod, he gestured for her to sit. Emily closed the door behind her and perched on the edge of the chair opposite him. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. "I know I'm the last person you want to talk to," Emily said finally, her voice trembling. "But I need you to know how sorry I am. For everything." Mark leaned back in his chair, his gaze hard. Sorry doesn't fix this, Emily. Sorry doesn't undo what you've done. I know, she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. And I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But I love you, Mark. I love this family. And I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Mark's jaw tightened as he struggled to rein in his emotions. He had spent weeks building walls around his heart, trying to shield himself from the pain of her betrayal. But now, faced with her raw vulnerability, those walls began to crack. You want to make things right, he said, his voice low. Then explain to me how we got here. How did you let this happen? Emily flinched at the bitterness in his tone, but she didn't look away. I let myself believe that our marriage was unfixable, she admitted. You were always working and I felt invisible. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but it's the truth. Mark closed his eyes, her words hitting him like a punch to the gut. He had always prided himself on being a provider, on ensuring that his family never wanted for anything. But in doing so, had he neglected the very people he was trying to protect? I should have noticed, Mark said quietly. I should have seen how unhappy you were. Emily shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. No, Mark, this isn't your fault. I made a choice, a terrible, selfish choice. But I want to fix this. I want to fix us. Mark stared at her. His emotions a swirling storm of anger, sadness, and a flicker of hope. It's not that simple, he said finally. Forgiveness doesn't come easy, Emily. And trust. Trust takes time to rebuild. I know, she said, her voice firm despite her tears. And I'm willing to do the work. For you. For Chloe and Alex. For us. Mark exhaled deeply, the weight of his emotions pressing down on him. He didn't know if forgiveness was possible, but he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I'll think about it, he said, his tone softer than before. But don't expect this to happen overnight. Emily nodded, relief washing over her. Thank you, Mark. That's all I ask. As she stood to leave, Mark glanced back at the photograph on his desk. The family in that picture seemed like strangers now, but a part of him longed to find his way back to them. He just didn't know if it was possible. Chloe Carter sat on her bed, her knees pulled to her chest, scrolling aimlessly through her phone. The glowing screen was a welcome distraction from the storm raging in her mind, though the constant barrage of cheerful posts from her friends only served to deepen her isolation. How could they go about their lives so effortlessly, while her family was crumbling around her? She glanced at the photo on her nightstand, one from her middle school graduation. Her parents stood on either side of her, beaming with pride. Alex had his arms slung around her shoulders, teasing her as usual. Back then, everything had felt so simple, so secure. Now, that photo felt like a cruel reminder of a family she no longer recognized. The sound of a soft knock on her door pulled Chloe from her thoughts. She frowned, setting her phone aside. Who is it? It's Mom, came the hesitant reply. Can I come in? Chloe hesitated, her first instinct to shout no and bury herself under the covers. But something in her mother's voice, an almost desperate softness, made her pause. With a reluctant sigh, she said, "Fine." The door creaked open, and Emily stepped inside, holding 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate. "I thought you might like one," she said, her tone cautious as she set the mugs on Chloe's desk. Chloe didn't respond, watching as Emily perched on the edge of the bed. Her mother looked older, more worn than she remembered. The lines on her face were deeper, and her shoulders slumped as if she were carrying the weight of the world. "Chloe," Emily began, her voice trembling, "I know I'm the last person you want to see right now. And I don't blame you for being angry. But I miss you. I miss talking to you." Chloe crossed her arms, her walls firmly in place. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you destroyed our family." Emily flinched at the venom in Chloe's words, but she nodded. "You're right. I made a terrible mistake. And I'll never stop regretting it. But I want to fix this. I want to fix us." Chloe scoffed, her voice sharp. "How do you fix something like this? Dad barely looks at you. Alex is walking around like a ghost. And me. I can't even stand to be in the same room as you half the time." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she forced herself to meet Chloe's gaze. "I know I've hurt you all, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I'm here, Chloe. I'm here, and I'm not giving up on us." Chloe looked away, her jaw tight. "You should have thought about us before she broke off, her voice cracking. "Before you did what you did." "I know," Emily said softly. "And I wish I could go back and undo it. But I can't. All I can do is try to make things right moving forward." Silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Chloe's thoughts swirled with anger, confusion, and an ache she couldn't name. Part of her wanted to scream at her mother, to let out all the pain that had been building inside her. But another part, a small, fragile part, longed for the closeness they used to share. Finally, Chloe spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you do it?" Emily's breath hitched, and she looked down at her hands. "Because I felt lost. Invisible. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but it's the truth. And I'm so sorry, Chloe. More than you'll ever know." Chloe stared at her mother, searching her face for any sign of deception. But all she saw was raw, unfiltered regret. For a moment, her walls cracked, though they didn't crumble entirely. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Chloe said finally, her tone uncertain. Emily nodded, her tears spilling over. "That's okay. Take all the time you need. I'll be here no matter what." Chloe didn't respond, but she reached for the mug of hot chocolate on her desk. She took a sip, the familiar taste stirring memories of simpler times. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step, a small, tentative step. The next day, Chloe decided to escape the suffocating tension of the house by meeting up with her best friend, Lily. They sat on the patio of their favorite cafe, sipping iced lattes as Chloe recounted the events of the past few weeks. "Wow," Lily said, her eyes wide. "That's a lot. Tell me about it," Chloe muttered, stirring her drink with the straw. "I don't even know how to feel anymore. Angry, sad, betrayed. It's like all of it at once." Lily reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on Chloe's. "It's okay to feel all of that. What your mom did was messed up. But, do you think she's really trying to fix things?" Chloe sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know. She says she is. And part of me wants to believe her. But the other part just can't." "That's fair," Lily said. "Trust takes time to rebuild. But it sounds like she's at least trying, which is more than some people would do." Chloe nodded, though she didn't feel any clearer about what to do. "I just wish things could go back to the way they were." "I know," Lily said gently. "But maybe they can still get better, even if they're not the same." That evening, Chloe found herself lingering in the living room after dinner. Alex was flipping through TV channels, and their parents were cleaning up in the kitchen. Chloe hesitated before sitting down beside her brother. "Anything good on?" she asked, her tone casual. Alex glanced at her, surprised but pleased. "Not really. But I can put on something you like." Chloe shrugged. "Whatever. I'm not picky." They settled on a light-hearted comedy, the sound of laughter filling the room. For the first time in weeks, Chloe felt a sense of normalcy, fragile but comforting. She wasn't ready to let her walls down completely, but for now this was enough. Alex Carter sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the open textbook in front of him. The words on the page blurred together, their meaning lost amidst the storm of guilt and regret swirling in his mind. He had always been the dependable one, the good son who held the family together. But now he was the one who had torn it apart. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on his chest, suffocating him with every passing moment. He had betrayed his father, hurt his sister, and crossed a line with his mother that should never have been crossed. No matter how hard he tried to rationalize it, to understand how things had spiraled out of control, he couldn't escape the truth. He had failed his family in the worst possible way. The sound of voices drifting up from the kitchen broke through his thoughts. Alex stood and moved to the doorway, listening as his parents talked in low voices. They had been spending more time together recently, trying to repair the fractured pieces of their marriage. Part of him was glad they deserved a chance to heal. But another part of him felt like an outsider, a shadow haunting the edges of their lives. He knew he couldn't avoid the conversation he had been dreading any longer. If he wanted to make things right, he needed to face his father and take responsibility for his actions. With a deep breath, Alex left his room and walked downstairs. Mark was sitting in the living room, a cup of coffee in hand as he stared out the window. The tension in his posture was palpable, and Alex hesitated in the doorway, his heart pounding. "Dad," Alex said softly, his voice shaking. "Can we talk?" Mark turned, his expression guarded. He didn't respond immediately, but after a moment, he gestured to the seat across from him. Alex sat down, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," Alex began, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to say this." Mark's gaze was steady, his face unreadable. "Go on." Alex swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I'm sorry. For everything. I know I've let you down, and I can't even begin to explain how much I regret what I've done. I don't even know how to make it right." Mark's jaw tightened, his grip on the coffee mug firm. "You're right. You did let me down. You let this entire family down." The word stung, but Alex nodded. "No. And I don't expect you to forgive me. Not now, maybe not ever. But I love this family, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix what I've broken." Mark leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Do you even understand the damage you've caused, Alex? Do you realize how much pain you've brought into this house?" "I do," Alex said, his voice cracking. "And I hate myself for it every single day." Mark studied his son for a long moment, his expression softening slightly. "Hating yourself won't fix anything. Actions speak louder than words, Alex. If you want to make this right, you need to show me and everyone else in this family that you mean it." "I will," Alex said firmly. "I'll prove it, Dad. I promise." Mark nodded slowly, though the tension in his shoulders didn't fully ease. "We'll see." The conversation with his father left Alex feeling raw, but it also gave him a sense of purpose. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he could control his actions moving forward. He decided to start small, finding ways to support his family and ease the burden they were all carrying. The first step was reaching out to Chloe. Their once close relationship had been strained since the confrontation, and Alex missed the easy camaraderie they had shared. He found her in the living room that evening, scrolling through her phone as a sitcom played in the background. "Hey," Alex said, sitting down on the couch beside her. Chloe glanced at him, her expression wary. "What do you want?" "I just want to talk," Alex said. "I know things have been rough between us, but I miss hanging out with you." Chloe snorted, her gaze fixed on the TV. "Yeah, well, things aren't exactly normal right now." "I know," Alex said softly. "And that's my fault. But I'm trying to make things better. For all of us." Chloe didn't respond immediately, her fingers tapping against her phone screen. Finally, she sighed and set it down. "What do you want me to say, Alex? That everything's okay?" "Because it's not." "I'm not asking you to say that," Alex replied. "I just want a chance to fix things. To earn back your trust." Chloe looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "It's going to take a lot more than words." "I know," Alex said. "And I'm ready to put in the work." Chloe was silent for a long moment before finally nodding. "Fine. But don't expect it to be easy." Alex nodded, relief washing over him. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, Alex made an effort to be present for his family. He helped Emily with chores around the house, joined Chloe for movie nights, and even started spending time with Mark in the garage, learning how to fix the old lawnmower that had been gathering dust for years. One afternoon, as Alex and Mark worked side by side, the silence between them felt less heavy than it had before. Alex handed Mark a wrench, and their hands brushed briefly. It was a small moment, but it carried a weight of unspoken understanding. "You're getting the hang of this," Mark said, his tone gruff but not unkind. "Thanks," Alex replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I guess I've got a good teacher." Mark glanced at him, his expression softening. "You've still got a long way to go, Alex. But you're trying. And that counts for something." The words weren't exactly an endorsement, but for Alex, they felt like a step in the right direction. He still carried the burden of his guilt, but for the first time, he felt like he was moving toward redemption. The Carter family was slowly finding its footing, but the wounds of betrayal still lingered. Every interaction was tinged with caution, every conversation measured. Yet, amidst the pain and uncertainty, small moments of connection began to surface, fragile yet promising signs that healing was possible. Emily decided it was time to take a step toward normalcy, even if it felt forced. She proposed a family outing to the beach, a place that had always held special memories for them. To her surprise, both Mark and Chloe agreed, albeit reluctantly. Alex, eager to mend his relationships, didn't hesitate to join. The drive to the beach was quiet, each family member lost in their thoughts. Emily gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing with hopes and fears. Would this outing bring them closer, or would it only highlight the distance that had grown between them? When they arrived, the familiar scent of salty air and the sound of crashing waves greeted them. The beach was nearly empty, the cool breeze keeping most visitors away. Emily carried the picnic basket while Alex grabbed the blankets and chairs. Mark and Chloe walked a few steps behind, their expressions unreadable. As they set up near the shore, Emily couldn't help but steal glances at her family. Mark's face was lined with tension, but he was here. That counted for something. Chloe's arms were crossed, her gaze fixed on the horizon, but she hadn't retreated into her usual silence. Alex, ever the peacemaker, busied himself arranging the blankets, his determination to foster unity evident in every gesture. "Let's play frisbee," Alex suggested, holding up the brightly colored disc he'd brought along. Chloe raised an eyebrow. "Seriously? Frisbee? Come on, it'll be fun," Alex said, his tone light. "Unless you're too scared to lose." Chloe rolled her eyes but stood up, brushing sand off her jeans. "Fine. But don't cry when I win." Emily watched as Alex and Chloe began tossing the frisbee back and forth, their banter growing louder and more playful. For the first time in weeks, Chloe's laughter rang out, a sound that filled Emily's heart with cautious optimism. Mark, sitting in a beach chair, observed the scene silently. Emily hesitated before approaching him, her steps tentative. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, sitting down in the chair beside him. Mark nodded, his gaze still fixed on the kids. They needed this. Maybe we all did. Emily followed his gaze, her heart swelling as she watched Alex deliberately throw the frisbee too high, causing Chloe to chase after it with a mock groan of frustration. "They're starting to heal," Emily said, her voice tinged with emotion. "Slowly, but it's something." Mark sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It's not just them. We all have a lot of work to do." Emily nodded, her throat tightening. "No. And I'm ready to do whatever it takes. For them. For us." Mark finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "It's going to take time, Emily. A lot of time." "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not giving up." They sat in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of the waves providing a soothing backdrop. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a step, a glimmer of hope that they might one day find their way back to each other. As the afternoon wore on, the family gathered for a picnic on the blanket. Emily had packed their favorite sandwiches, along with a thermos of hot cocoa to ward off the chill. The conversation was light, punctuated by moments of laughter that felt both foreign and familiar. At one point, Chloe nudged Alex with her elbow. "You're terrible at frisbee, by the way." Alex feigned offense. "Excuse me. I let you win out of the goodness of my heart." "Sure you did," Chloe said, rolling her eyes. "But seriously, thanks for today. It was nice." Alex's expression softened, and he nodded. It was. Mark, who had been quietly observing the exchange, cleared his throat. Maybe we should make this a regular thing. Family outings, I mean. Emily's heart skipped a beat at his words. I think that's a great idea, she said, her smile genuine. Chloe shrugged, her tone casual but not dismissive. As long as I don't have to play frisbee every time. The small joke drew a chuckle from Alex and a faint smile from Mark. Emily felt a flicker of warmth, a reminder that even in the midst of their pain, moments of connection were still possible. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the family lingered on the beach. Chloe collected seashells along the shore, occasionally showing off her finds to Alex. Mark and Emily sat side by side on the blanket, their shoulders almost touching. It's beautiful, Emily said, her voice soft as she watched the waves. It is, Mark agreed, his tone contemplative. It reminds me of that trip we took to the coast when the kids were little. Remember how Chloe got her kite stuck in that tree? Emily chuckled at the memory. And Alex climbed up to get it, even though he was terrified of heights. Mark smiled faintly, the nostalgia softening his features. Those were good times. They were, Emily said, her voice tinged with longing. I want us to have good times again, Mark. I know we can't go back to the way things were, but maybe we can create something new. Mark didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Finally he turned to her, his eyes searching hers. It's going to take a lot of work, Emily. From both of us. I'm ready, she said firmly. Whatever it takes. Mark nodded, his expression unreadable. But the fact that he hadn't dismissed her outright gave Emily a glimmer of hope, a fragile light in the darkness. As they packed up and prepared to leave, Chloe approached Emily, holding out a particularly beautiful shell. Here, she said, her tone hesitant. I thought you might like this one. Emily took the shell, her eyes filling with tears. Thank you, Chloe. It's beautiful. Chloe shrugged, avoiding her mother's gaze. Don't read too much into it. Emily smiled, cradling the shell in her hand. I won't. But it still means a lot. As they drove home, the atmosphere in the car was lighter than it had been in weeks. Emily glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Chloe and Alex talking quietly in the back seat. Mark sat beside her, his expression calm but contemplative. For the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to hope, not for perfection but for progress. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but this day had shown her that healing was possible. And for now that was enough. The outing to the beach had sparked something within the Carter family, a faint but undeniable sense of possibility. Though their wounds were far from healed, the shared moments of laughter and connection had reminded them that, despite the betrayal and pain, they were still a family. For Emily, it was a glimmer of hope she wasn't willing to let go. In the days following their trip, Emily focused her efforts on rebuilding trust, starting with Chloe. Her daughter remained guarded, her interactions with Emily cautious and measured. But Emily noticed small cracks in Chloe's armor, moments when her tone softened or when she lingered in the kitchen longer than usual after meals. One afternoon, Emily decided to take a more direct approach. She knocked on Chloe's door, holding a tray with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Chloe, it's me. Chloe's muffled voice came from inside. What do you want? I thought we could talk, Emily said. Or just sit together. No pressure. There was a long pause before the door creaked open. Chloe stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. Fine. But don't expect me to spill my guts or anything. Emily offered a small smile and stepped inside. Chloe returned to her bed, sitting cross-legged as Emily placed the tray on her desk. Emily took a seat in the chair, careful to give Chloe her space. I know I've said this before, Emily began, her voice steady but gentle, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Not just for what I did, but for the pain I've caused you. Chloe stared at her mug, her fingers tracing the rim. It's not just about what you did, Mom. It's about what it means. You broke something in this family. In me. Emily's chest tightened, but she nodded. No. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to repair that. But I also know that words alone won't fix anything. Chloe looked up, her expression conflicted. I don't know if it can be fixed. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Emily's heart ached at the honesty in Chloe's words, but she forced herself to remain composed. That's okay, Chloe. Take all the time you need. I'll be here no matter what. For a moment Chloe said nothing. Then she reached for her mug and took a small sip. The hot chocolate's good. Emily's smile was faint but genuine. I'm glad you like it. While Emily worked to mend her relationship with Chloe, Alex focused on reconnecting with his father. Mark had always been a steady presence in Alex's life, a source of guidance and support. But now, their relationship was strained, overshadowed by the betrayal that had shaken their family to its core. One evening, Alex found Mark in the garage, tinkering with the old lawnmower that had been his latest project. The scent of motor oil filled the air, and the rhythmic sound of metal tools clinking against the engine provided a steady backdrop. Need a hand? Alex asked, stepping inside. Mark glanced up, his expression unreadable. Do you know anything about engines? Not much, Alex admitted, picking up a wrench. But I'm a quick learner. Mark sighed, gesturing for Alex to join him. Fine. Pass me that socket wrench. As they worked side by side, Alex stole glances at his father, searching for any sign of openness. Mark's focus remained on the engine, his movements deliberate and precise. Finally, Alex broke the silence. Dad, I know things aren't great between us right now, Alex began, his voice careful. And I know it's my fault. But I want to make things better. Mark didn't look up, his expression stoic. Making things better isn't as simple as saying sorry, Alex. I know, Alex said. That's why I'm here. To show you that I'm willing to do the work. Mark paused, his hands stilling on the engine. He turned to Alex, his gaze piercing. Do you even understand what you've done? The damage you've caused? Alex nodded, his throat tightening. Do. And I hate myself for it every single day. Mark studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. Good. Because actions speak louder than words. If you're serious about fixing this, you'd better be ready to prove it. I am, Alex said, his voice firm. I won't let you down again. Mark returned his attention to the engine, but the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease slightly. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step. The next few days were filled with small but meaningful gestures. Alex joined Mark in the garage each evening, learning the intricacies of the lawnmower and offering to help with other household repairs. Emily began preparing family dinners again. Her efforts met with cautious acceptance from Chloe and Mark. One evening, as the family sat around the dining table, Chloe surprised everyone by speaking up. We should have a game night. Emily looked at her daughter, her surprise evident. A game night. Yeah, Chloe said, her tone casual. Might be fun. Or whatever. Alex grinned, his enthusiasm infectious. I'm in. I'll even let you pick the game, Chloe. Mark raised an eyebrow but didn't object. It's been a while since we've done that. Emily's heart swelled as she looked around the table. I think it's a great idea. Later that night, the family gathered in the living room, a board game spread out on the coffee table. The atmosphere was light, filled with laughter and playful banter. Chloe's competitive streak quickly emerged, while Alex made it his mission to sabotage her moves. Mark and Emily shared a glance across the table, a flicker of warmth passing between them. For the first time in months, the tension in the house seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of tentative connection. As the game came to an end, Chloe leaned back with a satisfied grin. I told you I'd win. Alex rolled his eyes. Beginner's luck. Please, Chloe said, waving him off. I've always been better at this than you. Mark chuckled, his laughter deep and genuine. It's nice to see you two getting along. Emily nodded, her smile soft. It is. As the family began to clean up, Emily couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but tonight had shown her that progress was possible. They were mending bridges, one step at a time. The fragile sense of normalcy that the Carter family had begun to build was a thin veneer over the deeper, unresolved issues that simmered beneath the surface. The beach outing and game night had provided moments of respite, but the truth was still an unspoken weight hanging over all of them. Each family member wrestled with their own version of the past, and Emily knew that if they truly wanted to move forward, they had to confront it together. It was Emily who made the decision to address the elephant in the room. One evening after dinner, she cleared her throat and spoke up as the family lingered at the table. "There's something I want to talk about," she said, her voice steady but tinged with apprehension. "I think it's time we face what's happened. Together." The room fell silent. Mark set his fork down, his expression guarded. Chloe crossed her arms, her jaw tightening, while Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It was clear that no one was eager to revisit the pain they had all worked so hard to bury. "What do you mean, face it?" Chloe asked, her tone sharp. "We all know what happened. What's the point of talking about it?" "The point," Emily said gently, "is that we can't keep pretending everything is fine. We've made progress, yes, but the hurt is still there. And I think the only way we can truly move forward is by addressing it." Mark leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "And what exactly do you want us to do, Emily? Sit around and hold hands while we rehash everything?" Emily met his gaze, her heart pounding. "I'm not saying it will be easy, but I think it's necessary." The tension in the room was palpable. For a moment, it seemed like the conversation would end there, with everyone retreating into their respective silos of pain. But then Alex spoke up, his voice quiet but resolute. "I think Mom's right," he said, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "We can't keep avoiding it. I know I've hurt all of you and I want to take responsibility for that. But I can't do it alone." Chloe looked at her brother, her expression conflicted. "It's not just about you, Alex. This whole thing. It's messed up everything." "I know," Alex said, his voice trembling. "And I'm sorry, Chloe. For all of it. I hate what I've done to this family." Mark sighed heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. "Fine," he said, his tone begrudging. "If we're going to do this, let's do it." Emily's heart swelled with a mix of relief and anxiety. She knew this conversation would be difficult, but she also knew it was a necessary step toward healing. The family gathered in the living room, the atmosphere tense but charged with a sense of purpose. Emily sat on the couch beside Mark, while Chloe and Alex took the chairs opposite them. For a moment no one spoke, the silence thick and oppressive. "I'll start," Emily said finally, her voice steady but soft. "I know I'm the one who caused all of this. I betrayed your trust, and I hurt this family in ways I can never take back. And for that I'm deeply, truly sorry." Chloe's gaze was cold, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Why, Mom? Why did you do it?" Emily took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Because I felt invisible. For a long time I felt like I was just going through the motions, like I wasn't seen or valued. That doesn't excuse what I did, but it's the truth." Mark's jaw tightened, his expression hard. "And instead of talking to me about it, you turned to Alex." "I know I should have come to you," Emily said, her voice trembling. "But I didn't. And that was my failure, Mark. Not yours." Alex spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. "Dad, this wasn't just Mom's fault. I was a part of it too. I should have known better. I should have stopped it before it started." Mark turned to his son, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "You're damn right you should have. You were supposed to be the responsible one, Alex. The one I could trust." "I know," Alex said, his voice breaking. "And I hate myself for letting you down. For letting all of you down." Chloe's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "What about me? Did anyone stop to think about how this would affect me?" Emily's heart ached at the pain in her daughter's voice. "Chloe, I'm so sorry. I know I've hurt you more than anyone." "You didn't just hurt me," Chloe snapped. You destroyed the family I thought I had. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? Tears filled Emily's eyes, but she forced herself to hold Chloe's gaze. I don't expect you to believe me right away. But I'll keep showing you, every day, that I'm committed to making things right. Mark sighed, his shoulders slumping. This isn't something we can fix overnight. It's going to take time. And effort. From all of us. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Emily said, her voice firm. I just need to know that you're willing to try. There was a long silence, each family member lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Chloe spoke, her tone reluctant but genuine. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I'll try. Alex nodded, his expression resolute. Me too. Mark looked at Emily. His eyes filled with a mix of love and hurt. I'll try. But it's going to take a lot. Emily nodded, her heart swelling with hope. That's all I can ask. The conversation lasted late into the night, each family member sharing their pain, their anger, and their hopes for the future. It wasn't easy. There were tears, raised voices, and moments of silence so heavy they seemed to fill the room. But by the end of it, there was a sense of catharsis, a feeling that they had finally taken the first step toward true healing. As the family dispersed, Emily sat alone in the living room, her heart heavy but hopeful. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time, she believed they could walk it together. The Carter family had taken a significant step forward by confronting their pain together, but rebuilding trust was an entirely different challenge. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt with a single conversation. It was a fragile bond that required time, effort, and consistent action. For Emily, Mark, Chloe, and Alex, it was a journey that would test their resolve and patience. The following morning, Emily woke up early, the previous night's conversation replaying in her mind. It had been emotionally draining, but it also left her with a sense of cautious hope. She knew she couldn't change the past, but she could control her actions moving forward. Emily decided to start by focusing on Mark. Their marriage had been the foundation of their family, and its fractures had rippled through everyone else. If they were going to rebuild, she and Mark needed to find their way back to each other. She found Mark in the kitchen, sipping his morning coffee and reading the news on his tablet. The atmosphere between them was still strained, but there was a noticeable softness in his demeanor, a sign that he was willing to try. Good morning, Emily said tentatively, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Mark glanced at her, his expression neutral. Morning. Emily sat down across from him, her hands wrapped around her mug. I was thinking maybe we could do something together today. Just the two of us. Mark raised an eyebrow, his skepticism evident. Like what? I don't know, Emily admitted. We could go for a walk or maybe have lunch somewhere. Something simple. Mark set his tablet down, his gaze searching hers. You think one lunch is going to fix everything? No, Emily said quickly. I don't. But I think it's a start. Mark was silent for a long moment before finally nodding. All right. Let's give it a try. Later that afternoon, Mark and Emily found themselves walking along a quiet trail at the local park. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and the trees were ablaze with shades of red and gold. The setting was peaceful, but the tension between them was palpable. For a while, they walked in silence, neither of them knowing how to break the ice. Finally, Emily spoke. Thank you for agreeing to this, she said softly. I know it's not easy. Mark's expression was contemplative. No, it's not. But I think last night was a step in the right direction. We needed to have that conversation. We did, Emily agreed. And I'm glad we did. But I know we have a long way to go. Mark stopped walking, turning to face her. Emily, I'm not going to pretend that everything is okay. What you did hurt me deeply. And it's going to take a lot to rebuild what we've lost. I understand, Emily said, her voice trembling. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I just hope you'll give me the chance to prove myself. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. I want to try. For the kids and for us. But I need to see that you're committed to this, to making things right. Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Mark. I promise you I am. They continued their walk, the silence between them less heavy than before. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a step toward rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. While Emily focused on her relationship with Mark, Alex took it upon himself to mend his bond with Chloe. He knew that their once close relationship had been deeply affected by his actions, and he was determined to make amends. One evening, Alex knocked on Chloe's bedroom door. "Chloe, can I come in?" Chloe's muffled voice responded. "What do you want?" "I just want to talk," Alex said. "Please." After a moment, the door opened and Chloe stood there, her expression wary. "Fine. But make it quick." Alex stepped inside, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Look, I know I've screwed up. Big time. And I know I've hurt you. But I want to make things right." Chloe crossed her arms, her gaze cold. "You think saying sorry is enough?" "No," Alex said quickly. "I don't. But I want to start somewhere. You're my sister, Chloe, and I hate that I've hurt you. I miss how things used to be between us." Chloe's eyes narrowed. "How do you expect me to trust you again, Alex? After everything?" "I don't expect you to trust me right away," Alex admitted. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn it back. I just hope you'll give me a chance." Chloe was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally she sighed. "I don't know if I can forgive you, but I guess I can try." Alex felt a surge of relief, though he kept his tone measured. "That's all I'm asking for." "Thank you, Chloe." Over the next few weeks, the Carter family continued to take small but meaningful steps toward rebuilding their relationships. Mark and Emily began attending counseling sessions together, where they confronted the issues that had led to the fractures in their marriage. The sessions were difficult, forcing them to face uncomfortable truths about themselves and each other. But they also provided a sense of clarity and direction. Chloe and Alex started spending more time together, their interactions slowly regaining the ease and playfulness they once had. Whether it was watching movies, playing board games, or simply talking, they found ways to reconnect and rebuild their sibling bond. One evening, the family decided to have dinner together at a local restaurant. It was the first time they had gone out as a family since the confrontation, and the atmosphere was tentative but hopeful. They laughed over shared memories, teased each other about old habits, and even managed to enjoy the meal without the usual tension. As they left the restaurant, Emily glanced at Mark, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you for tonight. Means a lot." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It was nice. We should do it again." Emily smiled, her hope rekindled. "I'd like that." The journey to rebuild trust was far from over, but the Carter family was beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. They had faced their pain, confronted their mistakes, and taken the first steps toward healing. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As Emily lay in bed that night, she reflected on how far they had come. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she believed they could navigate it together. And for now that was enough. The progress the Carter family had made was undeniable, but the road to healing was far from smooth. Trust, once broken, was fragile and required constant effort to nurture. For all their recent strides toward reconciliation, it would take a true test to reveal whether the bonds they were rebuilding could withstand the weight of their past. The opportunity for such a test came unexpectedly one chilly November afternoon. Chloe was in her room, finishing up a school project, when Emily knocked on her door. Chloe sighed, pushing her laptop aside. "Come in." Emily entered cautiously, holding a flyer in her hand. "Hey, sweetheart. I wanted to talk to you about something." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Emily handed her the flyer, which was for a weekend family retreat at a nearby nature lodge. "I thought it might be a good idea for us to spend some focused time together. No distractions, just us." Chloe scanned the flyer, her skepticism evident. "A family retreat? Are you serious?" "I know it might sound cliché," Emily admitted, "but I think it could help. We've been making progress, but I feel like we could use some dedicated time to really reconnect." Chloe crossed her arms, her expression guarded. And what makes you think this is going to fix everything? I don't think it'll fix everything, Emily said. But it might bring us a step closer. Chloe was silent for a moment, then sighed. Fine. But if it's awful, I'm blaming you. Emily smiled, relief washing over her. Fair enough. The family arrived at the retreat the following Saturday, their car packed with warm clothes and hiking gear. The lodge was nestled in the woods, surrounded by towering pines and a serene lake. The air was crisp and fresh, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. The retreat's itinerary was filled with activities designed to foster communication and trust, from team-building exercises to guided discussions. The Carters were assigned a cabin with a cozy fireplace and a small deck overlooking the lake. It was picturesque, but the tension among them was palpable. Let's just get through this, Chloe muttered as they unpacked. The sooner it's over, the better. Mark shot her a warning look. We're here to try, Chloe. Let's at least give it a chance. Chloe rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Alex, ever the peacemaker, stepped in. Come on, guys. Let's try to make the best of it. The first activity on the schedule was a trust-building exercise called the blindfold walk. One family member would be blindfolded and guided through an obstacle course by another, relying solely on verbal directions. The goal was to build trust and improve communication. Emily volunteered to go first, much to Chloe's surprise. Mark stepped forward to be her guide. As Emily put on the blindfold, her heart pounded. She knew this exercise was symbolic, but it felt deeply personal. Could she trust Mark to guide her? And more importantly, could he trust her to listen? Ready? Mark asked, his voice steady but distant. Ready, Emily said, her hands trembling slightly. Mark began giving directions, his tone firm but patient. Take a small step forward. Now another. There's a log in front of you. Step over it carefully. Emily followed his instructions, her trust in him growing with each step. When she stumbled slightly on a rock, Mark's hand shot out to steady her. You okay? He asked, concern flickering in his voice. I'm fine, Emily said, her voice soft. Thank you. They completed the course without incident, and as Emily removed the blindfold, she looked at Mark with gratitude. You did great, she said, her smile genuine. So did you, Mark replied, his tone softer than it had been in weeks. The next activity was a group discussion led by one of the retreat facilitators. The Carters were asked to share one thing they appreciated about each family member and one thing they wanted to work on in their relationships. Chloe was the first to speak. I appreciate that Mom is trying, she said, her voice hesitant. But I want to see more action. Words aren't enough. Emily nodded, her expression earnest. That's fair, Chloe. And I promise you'll see more from me. Mark went next. I appreciate Alex's willingness to step up and take responsibility. But I want to see more consistency from everyone. Rebuilding trust takes time, and we all need to stay committed. Alex swallowed hard, his guilt evident. I appreciate how patient you've all been with me, even though I don't deserve it. And I want to work on being the kind of son and brother you can be proud of. When it was Emily's turn, she took a deep breath. I appreciate each of you more than I can put into words. Mark, your strength and dedication inspire me every day. Chloe, your honesty keeps us grounded. And Alex, your resilience gives me hope. I know I have a lot to work on, but I promise I won't give up. The facilitator nodded, her expression encouraging. That was a great start. Remember, progress is about small, consistent steps. The weekend continued with more activities, including a family hike and a bonfire where the group shared stories and roasted marshmallows. For the first time in months, the Carters laughed together, their barriers momentarily lowered. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Chloe spoke up. This isn't as bad as I thought it would be. Mark chuckled. High praise coming from you. Chloe smirked, but her expression softened. Mean it. I know we're not perfect, but this feels good. Alex nodded, his voice earnest. Does. I just hope we can keep it up when we go home. Emily placed a hand on Alex's shoulder, her touch gentle. We will. We're stronger than we think. Mark's gaze met Emily's across the fire, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. It's not going to be easy, but I think we're finally heading in the right direction. As the retreat came to an end, the Carters packed up their belongings and prepared to head home. The weekend had been challenging, but it had also been transformative. They weren't healed, not completely, but they were on the path to something better. As they drove away from the lodge, Emily looked out the window, her heart full of hope. The test of their progress hadn't been perfect, but it had shown her that they were capable of growth. And for the first time in a long time, she believed they could face the future together. The family retreat had been a turning point for the Carters, but the true test of their progress came in the days and weeks that followed. Back in the familiar environment of their home, old routines threatened to creep back in, and the challenges of everyday life loomed large. It was one thing to find peace in the bubble of a retreat, but maintaining it in the real world required resilience, effort, and unity. Emily was determined to keep the momentum going. She began implementing small rituals that fostered connection: family dinners every evening, game nights once a week, and morning walks with Mark whenever he had time. At first, the changes felt forced, almost awkward, but over time, they became a natural part of their routine. One crisp Saturday morning, Emily woke up early to prepare breakfast. She wanted to surprise her family with their favorites: pancakes for Chloe, scrambled eggs and bacon for Alex, and black coffee with a hint of cinnamon for Mark. The smell of sizzling bacon soon filled the kitchen, drawing Alex downstairs. "Morning, Mom," Alex said, his voice groggy but cheerful. He rubbed his eyes and sat at the table, watching her flip pancakes with practiced ease. "Good morning, sweetheart," Emily replied, her tone light. "Hungry?" "Always," Alex said with a grin. He hesitated for a moment before adding, "Thanks for doing this. It's nice, having mornings like this." Emily's heart swelled at his words. "I'm glad you think so. Family time is important, and I want us to have more of it." As Chloe and Mark joined them at the table, the atmosphere was relaxed, almost cheerful. Chloe rolled her eyes at Alex's attempts to steal her bacon, while Mark chuckled quietly at their playful banter. Emily watched the scene unfold, her chest tight with emotion. For the first time in months, she felt like they were a family again. Later that day, the family tackled a home project together, repainting the living room. The walls had been scuffed and faded over the years, and Emily decided it was time for a refresh. She picked out a soft gray color that felt modern yet warm, and everyone pitched in to help. Chloe, armed with a roller, eyed Alex mischievously. "Bet you can't paint faster than me." Alex smirked, dipping his roller into the paint tray. "Oh, it's on." Their playful competition quickly turned into a paint war, with both of them smearing streaks of gray on each other's arms. Emily laughed as Chloe chased Alex around the room, her roller poised for attack. "Careful, you two," Mark warned, though his smile betrayed his amusement. "We're supposed to be painting the walls, not each other." Emily glanced at Mark, her heart warming at the sight of his relaxed demeanor. The stress lines on his face seemed softer, and his laughter felt genuine. It was a reminder of the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. By the time they finished, the room looked fresh and inviting, though there was more paint on their clothes than on the walls. As they cleaned up, Chloe leaned against the ladder, her cheeks flushed from laughter. "This was fun," she admitted, her tone begrudging but sincere. "We should do stuff like this more often." Emily smiled, her chest tight with emotion. "I'd like that too, Chloe." In the evenings, Emily and Mark made an effort to spend time together, even if it was just sitting on the couch with a cup of tea. Their conversations were still cautious, but they were longer and more meaningful than they had been in years. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Mark turned to Emily, his expression thoughtful. "Do you remember our first apartment?" Emily chuckled, the memory warming her. "How could I forget? The leaky faucet, the creaky floors, and that tiny kitchen." Mark smiled, a hint of nostalgia in his eyes. "We didn't have much, but we were happy. We made it work." We did, Emily said softly. And I think we can make this work too. Mark nodded, his gaze steady. Think so too. But it's going to take time, Emily. And trust. I know, Emily said, her voice firm. And I'm ready to put in the work. Whatever it takes. Mark reached out and took her hand. His touch tentative but reassuring. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of 1,000 words. For Emily, it was a sign that they were on the right path. While Emily and Mark worked on their relationship, Chloe and Alex continued to rebuild their sibling bond. They spent more time together, whether it was studying for exams, watching movies, or helping each other with chores. Their banter returned, light and teasing, a sign that the wounds between them were beginning to heal. One afternoon, Chloe knocked on Alex's door, holding a plate of cookies. "Truce," she said, her tone playful. Alex grinned, taking the plate. "I didn't know we were at war, but sure. Truce." Chloe sat on the edge of his bed, watching as Alex bit into a cookie. "You've been different lately. In a good way, I mean." "Thanks," Alex said, his tone sincere. "I'm trying, Chloe. I really am." "I can tell," Chloe said softly. "And I appreciate it." Alex nodded, a hint of relief in his expression. "That means a lot, Chloe. Really." Their conversation was simple, but it carried the weight of their shared history and the hope for a better future. As the days turned into weeks, the Carter family continued to grow stronger. They weren't perfect. Arguments still flared, and moments of tension reminded them of the work that lay ahead. But they faced these challenges together, leaning on each other for support. One evening, as they gathered in the living room for a movie night, Emily looked around at her family. Chloe was curled up on the couch with a blanket, Alex was passing out bowls of popcorn, and Mark was adjusting the volume on the TV. The scene was so ordinary, yet it felt extraordinary, a testament to how far they had come. As the movie started, Emily reached out and took Mark's hand. He squeezed it gently, a silent acknowledgement of their journey. Emily's heart swelled with gratitude and hope. They still had a long way to go, but they were facing it together. And that, she realized, was the true strength of their family. The Carter family had come a long way from the painful unraveling that had threatened to tear them apart. The months of effort, vulnerability, and shared determination had not only helped them begin to heal but had also forged a stronger bond than they had ever thought possible. But the journey to this point had been anything but easy. Emily sat at the dining room table one quiet evening, flipping through a scrapbook she hadn't touched in years. The pages were filled with photos of family vacations, birthdays, and milestones, each image a snapshot of a simpler, happier time. Her fingers lingered on a photo of her and Mark dancing at their wedding, their smiles radiant and carefree. She sighed, closing the scrapbook and resting her hands on its worn cover. Lost in thought. Mark's voice broke the silence, and Emily looked up to see him standing in the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs of tea. "Just reminiscing," she said softly as he set a mug in front of her and sat down. "I've been thinking about how far we've come. How much we've been through." Mark nodded, his gaze distant. "It hasn't been easy." "No," Emily agreed. "But we're still here. Together." Mark met her eyes, his expression contemplative. "I wasn't sure we'd make it. There were times when I thought, maybe it would be easier to walk away." Emily swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "I thought about that too," she admitted. "But then I realized that what we have is worth fighting for." Mark reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I'm glad we both came to the same conclusion." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Me too." The next day, the Carters decided to tackle a long-overdue project, planting a garden in the backyard. It was something Emily had always dreamed of doing but had never found the time, or the unity, to make happen. Now it felt like the perfect way to mark their progress as a family. They spent the morning clearing the overgrown weeds and preparing the soil. Chloe, armed with a trowel, insisted on organizing the layout, while Alex hauled bags of soil and compost. Mark handled the heavier work, digging trenches and setting up a small trellis for climbing plants. Emily, meanwhile, carefully arranged rows of flowers and vegetables, her hands caked with dirt. "Chloe, that's not where the tomatoes are supposed to go," Alex teased, pointing to the spot she was digging. "Mom said they need more sunlight." "Well, maybe if you actually listened, you'd know that I'm putting the tomatoes over here," Chloe shot back, her tone playful. Emily laughed as she watched her children bicker good-naturedly, their camaraderie a far cry from the tension that had once defined their interactions. "You two are like an old married couple." "Please don't say that," Alex groaned, wrinkling his nose. "That's weird." Mark chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "At least they're working together." By the time they finished, the garden was a patchwork of colors and textures, a testament to their combined efforts. Emily stood back and admired their work, her chest tight with pride. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. Mark put an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "We did good." That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, there was a palpable sense of accomplishment. The meal was simple: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread, but it felt celebratory. Chloe and Alex recounted their gardening misadventures, and Mark shared a story about a particularly challenging client at work. Emily listened, her gaze sweeping over her family. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The cracks in their foundation hadn't disappeared, but they had been filled with something stronger: understanding, resilience, and love. As the meal came to an end, Emily raised her glass of water. "I just want to say how proud I am of all of us. We've been through so much, but we've come out stronger. And I know we still have work to do, but I truly believe we're on the right path." Mark nodded, lifting his own glass. "Plus, to moving forward." "To moving forward," Chloe and Alex echoed, their voices overlapping. They clinked their glasses together, the sound a quiet but powerful symbol of their unity. Over the next few weeks, the Carter family continued to build on their newfound foundation. Emily and Mark's relationship grew stronger with each passing day, their shared moments of laughter and connection rekindling the love that had once seemed lost. Chloe and Alex's bond deepened as well, their sibling banter and mutual support becoming a constant source of joy for the family. One Friday evening, as they sat together in the living room for their weekly movie night, Chloe turned to Emily with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," she said, "do you think things will ever go back to the way they were?" Emily considered the question carefully before answering. "No, sweetheart. I don't think they will." Chloe frowned. "Then what's the point of all this?" "The point," Emily said gently, "is that we're creating something new, something better. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it and build a future that's even stronger." Chloe nodded slowly, her expression contemplative. "I guess that makes sense." "It does," Mark chimed in, his voice steady. "We've been through hell, but we've come out the other side. And we're still standing. That says a lot." Alex grinned, leaning back in his chair. "It says we're stubborn." The room erupted into laughter, the sound warm and genuine. For Emily, it was a reminder of how far they had come, and how much further they could go. As the Carter family prepared for bed that night, Emily lingered in the living room, gazing at the flickering flames in the fireplace. Mark joined her, his presence grounding and reassuring. "You okay?" he asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I'm more than okay," Emily said, leaning into him. "I'm grateful." Mark kissed her temple, his voice soft. "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their journey settling around them like a warm blanket. The road ahead wasn't without challenges, but they faced it together, armed with the lessons they had learned and the strength they had gained. The Carter family wasn't perfect. No family was. But they were whole, and that was enough.